Abigail Carter did not stop to think. She dropped her basket in the mud, grabbed her father's worn medical bag, and ran toward the overturned carriage at the bottom of the ravine, even as every voice behind her screamed at her to turn back. A woman alone had no business near a strange man's wreck. She knew that. She ran anyway. The summer heat pressed down like a hand on her back, and the man bleeding in the wreck had no idea that the woman crawling toward him would change the entire course of his life. If this story already has your heart beating faster, subscribe to our channel, follow every part until the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The storm had come without warning, the way most disasters do. One moment, the sky above Richmond County, Virginia, held the flat white heat of a summer afternoon in 1816. The next, it cracked open like a rotted plank, and the rain came down in sheets so thick a man could barely see his own hand in front of his face. Thunder rolled across the low hills, rattling windows in their frames, sending chickens scrambling for cover beneath every porch in the county. Abigail Carter was crossing the east pasture when the first bolt split the sky. She was carrying a basket of dried chamomile and a small jar of her father's old willow bark tincture to old Mrs. Hensley, who lived alone on the far side of the good road and whose knees had been giving her trouble since April. Abigail made the walk twice a week. She had been making it for 3 years, ever since her father died, and left her the house, the herbs, the medical bag, and a debt to the county land office that she was still working off at the rate of $2 a month. She tucked the basket under her arm and started moving faster. Not running, the ground was already soft from the week's earlier rains, and a turned ankle served nobody but moving with the kind of quiet urgency she had inherited from her father. Dr. Thomas Carter had never panicked in her memory, not once. Not even the morning they brought in the Whitfield boy with his arm near torn off from the mill wheel. He had simply taken off his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and gotten to work. Abigail had learned to do the same. She had almost reached the edge of the pasture when she heard it. Not the thunder, not the rain. A sound beneath those things. A groaning crash, the splintering of wood, and then faint but unmistakable the high, terrified scream of horses. She stopped. The sound had come from the direction of Miller's Creek Crossing, about a quarter-mile south along the good road. She knew that crossing. She had crossed it 100 times. She also knew that the wooden bridge there had been weakened by the spring floods, and that the county had been arguing for 2 months about who was responsible for repairing it, and that no one had done anything yet because, in her experience, county arguments about money and responsibility rarely resolved themselves quickly. She changed direction without making a decision. Her feet simply turned south, and the rest of her followed. The bridge was gone. Or rather, it was still there, but it had given way at the center, and the front wheels of a large black carriage had gone through the rotted planks and dragged the whole vehicle down into the creek bed. The horses, 2 of them dark bays, enormous and panicked, were tangled in their harnesses, thrashing against the water and the mud, their screams cutting through the sound of the rain. A man in dark livery was standing at the edge of the bank, calling down into the wreck. His hat was gone, his coat soaked through, his voice cracking with something between alarm and helplessness. "Sir, sir, can you hear me? Sir, you must answer me, please." Abigail came up beside him at a near run and caught the sleeve of his coat. He startled so badly he nearly went off the bank himself. "Good God, woman." "Is there someone in the carriage?" she said. The man stared at her. He was older, heavy-set, his face a map of broken veins and genuine fear. "You shouldn't be here, miss. This is no place for a—" "Is there someone in the carriage?" she said again, the same tone, no higher, no lower. He looked back down at the wreck. "My employer," he said. "He was inside. The carriage rolled when the bridge gave. I was on the driver's seat. I was thrown clear, but he—" The man's voice fractured. He hasn't answered me." Abigail was already looking down the embankment. It was steep, rain-slicked, maybe 12 feet down to the creek bed. The carriage had come to rest on its side against a stand of young sycamores, the door now facing up at the sky like a hatch on a sinking boat. "They're away down," she said. "Miss, you cannot go down there." "Is there a way down the bank, or do I slide?" she said. The man blinked at her. Then he pointed 50 yards upstream. There's a livestock path, but Miss Truly, you should not. She was already moving. The livestock path was narrow and treacherous with mud, and she went down it sideways. One hand braced against the bank, her basket hooked over her elbow, her boots soaking through before she reached the bottom. She waded through 6 inches of rushing creek water to reach the carriage. "Hello," she called loudly, pitched to carry over the rain. "Can you hear me in there? Hello?" Nothing for a moment, and then a sound. Low. A man's voice, thick with pain. "Here," it said. Just the one word. But it was enough. She got her hands on the frame of the carriage door, now facing skyward, and pulled. It was heavier than she expected, and the hinges had been bent in the crash. She worked at it with both hands, bracing her feet against the carriage body, and finally it swung up and over with a groan of tortured metal. She looked down through the opening. A man was inside, wedged against what had been the far wall of the carriage interior, and was now the floor. He was tall. She could see that, even with him crumpled into the space, and he was dressed in the kind of clothing that cost more than her father's entire medical practice had earned in any given year. Dark wool coat, fine linen shirt, leather riding boots that had probably been made for him specifically by someone who did nothing else. His dark hair was wet and plastered to his forehead. There was blood on his right temple, and from the way he was holding his arm across his chest, something in his left shoulder was not where it was supposed to be. But his eyes were open, and they were fixed on her with an expression she could not quite name. Not fear, not relief exactly. Something quieter than either of those things. "You're real," he said. "Last I checked," Abigail said. She dropped down through the door and landed in a crouch beside him. "Don't move your left arm. Can you tell me where else you're hurt?" "My shoulder." "I can see your shoulder. Anywhere else? Ribs, legs?" He was quiet for a moment, taking stock in the methodical way of a man accustomed to assessing situations rather than reacting to them. "Ribs maybe, right side. Legs seem to be working. The door came off its frame and caught my arm when we went over." The door. She looked up at the bent frame above them. "You put your arm up." "Reflex. Good reflex," she said. She set down the basket, opened it, and found the folded linen strips she kept at the bottom for exactly this kind of occasion. Her father had taught her that you carried bandages the way you carried good sense always, whether you thought you needed them or not. "My name is Abigail Carter. My father was the doctor in this county for 22 years. I'm going to look at your shoulder, and then we're going to figure out how to get you out of here." The man looked at her steadily. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd first guessed. Not old, but not young either. Somewhere in his middle 30s, with the kind of face that held its expression carefully, like a man who had learned early that what showed on his face could be used against him. "Nathaniel," he said. "All right, Nathaniel. I'm going to touch your shoulder now. This is going to hurt." "I expect it will," he said, in a tone that suggested he had catalogued the pain and set it to one side, and intended to deal with it at a more convenient time. She pressed her fingers carefully along the joint, and felt the shoulder confirm what she already suspected. Dislocated. Completely. The head of the bone was sitting forward, and down, exactly where it shouldn't be. "This needs to be set," she said. "I can do it, but I'll need your arm straight, and I need you to try not to pull away from me when I do." "That's generally when people pull away," he observed. "Yes," she said, "which is why I'm telling you not to." Something changed in his face. Not a smile exactly. Something smaller than a smile, but in the same family. "All right, Miss Carter," he said. "Do what needs doing." She set the shoulder in the bottom of a wrecked carriage in the middle of a Virginia thunderstorm, with creek water rising around her boots and the sound of his hired man calling down anxiously from the bank above. She did it cleanly, one smooth rotation, following the anatomy, the way her father had shown her on diagrams. She still kept pressed in the back of his old medical text, and the joint seated itself with a sound like a knuckle cracking, sudden and definitive. Nathaniel made one sound. Low controlled the kind of sound a man makes when he has decided that making sound is permissible, but that losing control is not. Then he was quiet. "Good," Abigail said, and began binding the arm to his chest. "You'll need to keep it immobile. Probably 2 weeks. No riding." 2 weeks, he repeated. Something in his tone suggested that 2 weeks was a significant problem. "Longer if you don't listen," she said. He was quiet for a moment while she worked. Then, "You came down alone. Your man was calling. You weren't answering. He could have come down himself." "He didn't," she said simply. Nathaniel watched her face while she worked. She could feel it, that steady, quiet attention, but she was busy, and there was no time to be self-conscious about it. "You knew how to do that," he said. "Set the shoulder." "My father taught me." "Is your father the doctor here?" She kept her hands moving. "He was. He died 3 years ago." She tied off the binding and sat back on her heels. "I've been managing since. Can you sit up?" He sat up slowly, carefully testing. His jaw was tight. "Yes." "Good. We need to get you out of here before this water rises anymore." Getting a 6-foot man with a bound shoulder and possibly cracked ribs up through a carriage door that was now essentially a ceiling hatch in a thunderstorm, with a swollen creek rising around them, was not a small undertaking. But Abigail Carter was not in the habit of standing in front of difficult things and wondering if they could be done. She was in the habit of working out how to do them. She went up first, got both hands on the frame above, and hauled herself out. Then she braced herself across the side of the carriage and reached back down for him. "Your right hand," she said. "Give me your right hand." He looked up at her, this woman with creek mud on her boots and rain in her hair, and her arm extended down to him through the open hatch, and for just a moment something moved across his face that she was too busy to read. Then he reached up and took her hand. She pulled. He pushed from below with his right arm, and whatever his legs could manage, and between the two of them they got him out of the wreck and sitting on the side of the capsized carriage in the pouring rain. He was breathing hard. She was breathing hard. The creek continued to rise around them. "Can you walk?" she said. "Yes." "Then we walk." The hired man. His name was Fowler, and he had been in Nathaniel's employ for 11 years, and was therefore accustomed to managing difficult situations, though not usually ones that involved his employer being hauled out of a wrecked carriage by a countrywoman, met them at the top of the livestock path, and immediately took Nathaniel's right arm over his shoulders. "Sir, I am deeply sorry the bridge gave without any warning at all. Fowler," Nathaniel said. "Are the horses all right?" Fowler blinked. Yes, sir. I got them free of the harness. They're shaken, but not injured." "Good. And the carriage?" "The axle is broken, and the door frame is bent. We won't be driving it anywhere." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, looking back down at the wreck. Then he turned to Abigail. "The road north to Richmond," he said. "How far is the nearest house?" Abigail looked at him. She looked at the sky, which was still delivering rain in serious quantities with no sign of letting up. She looked at his arm bound across his chest, and his temple, which was still seeping blood that she hadn't had the opportunity to properly clean, and the way he was holding his right side, in a way that suggested the ribs were making themselves known. She made a decision. "Mine," she said. "A quarter-mile north. You can shelter there until the road is passable." Fowler's expression shifted in a way she caught and understood. He was looking at his employer's coat and his employer's boots and his employer's general bearing, and he was calculating the distance between those things and whatever picture he had formed of Abigail Carter's house. Nathaniel didn't look at Fowler. "Thank you, Miss Carter," he said. "We'll impose on your hospitality as briefly as possible." "You won't impose," she said. "You'll rest, and I'll see to that head wound, and tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." The house was exactly what it was: small, well-kept, spare. 2 rooms downstairs, 1 up. A kitchen garden that she maintained herself. Shelves along the main room's walls that held her father's medical texts, her own notebooks, and more labeled jars of dried herbs, roots, and tinctures than most men had ever seen in one place. She put Nathaniel in the chair nearest the hearth, the good chair, the one that had been her father's, and built up the fire because wet and shock together were a poor combination, and she had seen too many people take a chill after surviving the thing that was supposed to kill them. Fowler hovered near the door, clearly uncertain whether he should stay or go, or what exactly his role was in a situation where his employer was sitting in a countrywoman's kitchen, being tended by that same countrywoman, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "There's a barn," Abigail told him. "Dry. You can see to the horses there. I have feed enough for 2 more. Get yourself dry and come back. I'll have something hot on the stove." Fowler looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel gave a small nod. Fowler went. Abigail pulled a stool up to the chair and examined the wound at Nathaniel's temple in the firelight. Close up, it was less severe than she'd feared, a deep cut from some edge inside the carriage, but clean, not ragged. She cleaned it with spirit of wine from the cabinet, and he didn't flinch, and she appreciated that because flinching made the work harder. "You should have stitches," she said. "Can you do it?" "Yes." "Then do it." She threaded the needle. "You're very calm for a man who came within a few feet of drowning in a creek an hour ago." "I came within a few feet of drowning because the county hasn't repaired that bridge," he said. "That's a matter of some anger to me. It doesn't require panic." She paused with the needle. "Have you told the county that—" "Not yet," he said, and something in his voice suggested that telling the county was something he was in a position to do with some effect. She made the first stitch. He didn't move. "Is this your first time through this county?" "No," he said. "But I've been traveling a different road. A matter of business." "What kind of business?" A pause. "Just long enough to be noticeable." "Land?" he said. "Agricultural investments." It was true, she thought, but not complete. She noticed the incompleteness the way she noticed symptoms, not accusingly, just as data. Some injury or condition that wasn't showing its full nature yet. She made the second stitch. "Are you from Virginia?" "Born here," he said. "But I've been based in Boston these past several years." "Long way from home." "I suppose." She made the third stitch and tied it off. "Does someone need to be told you've been delayed? A wife, family?" Another of those careful pauses. "No wife," he said. "My business partner knows my general route. He'll assume delay when I don't arrive on schedule. And he won't worry. He'll assume I found something that required attention," Nathaniel said. "He's generally right when he assumes that." Abigail leaned back and studied her work. 3 neat stitches, even and close. Her father would have approved. "You're done," she said. "You need to eat something, and then you need to sleep. The pain in your ribs will be worse tomorrow than it is tonight, so rest while you can." He looked at her. That same steady, quiet attention, but more direct now, in the close warmth of the firelight. "You do this regularly," he said. "Care for people. When they need it. Even strangers." "Especially strangers," she said. "People who know you can sometimes wait. Strangers can't wait for someone who likes them better to come along." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your father taught you that." "My father said it," she said. "I decided to believe it." She made cornbread and bean soup, which was what she had, and what took the least time. Fowler came in from the barn smelling of horse and rain, and ate with the focused gratitude of a man who had been genuinely frightened and was relieved to have something ordinary to do. Nathaniel ate more slowly, but he ate, and she counted that as a victory. Afterward, she made up the settle bed near the fire for Nathaniel. It was the best sleeping surface in the house, and better for a man with cracked ribs than climbing stairs, and showed Fowler the small room off the kitchen where she kept winter stores, and where there was a serviceable cot. She went upstairs to her own room, and lay in the dark listening to the rain ease off, and thought about the stranger in her chair. There was something about him she couldn't place. Not the clothes, though the clothes were unmistakably expensive. Not the way he spoke, though he spoke like a man who had been educated carefully and who used words precisely. It was something in the quality of his attention, the way he asked questions as though the answers genuinely mattered to him, The way he hadn't looked away from her once, not with embarrassment, not with the reflexive appraisal most men aimed at women and then forgot. He had looked at her the way her father used to look at a particularly interesting patient, like she was something worth understanding. She wasn't accustomed to that. She wasn't sure what to do with it. She set it aside the way she set aside anything she didn't have an immediate use for, and went to sleep. In the morning, the roads were still a mess of mud and standing water, and word came by way of a passing farmer that the bridge at Miller's Creek had not merely given way, but had collapsed entirely into the creek bed, and that the county road north to Richmond would be impassable for at least 3 days while the water went down. Fowler brought this news in from the road with the expression of a man who had been dreading the conversation. Nathaniel received it without visible alarm. He was sitting in the chair by the now cold hearth, his coat hanging over the back, his right arm resting on his knee, his bound left arm still across his chest. He had slept, apparently. Abigail could tell by the slight easement around his eyes, the way the pain had settled into something he could manage rather than something managing him. 3 days, he said. At least, sir, Fowler said. Nathaniel looked at Abigail. Miss Carter, you said we would not impose. You won't, she said. She was at the kitchen table grinding dried elderberry with a pestle, and she didn't look up. You'll work. There's a fence along the south pasture that needs mending, and Fowler looks like a man who knows his way around a fence post. Fowler looked briefly startled, then unexpectedly pleased. I was raised on a farm, ma'am, he said, before I entered service. Good, she said. The posts and wire are in the barn. I'll show you before I go to see Mrs. Hensley. She did look up then at Nathaniel. You, she said, will rest. Your ribs need it, and your shoulder needs it, and you will not help anyone by being stubborn about it. He held her gaze for a moment. As you say, Miss Carter, he said. But when she left for Mrs. Hensley's, she glanced back once through the window and saw him standing at her bookshelves studying the spines of her father's medical texts with an expression of genuine interest. She turned back to the road, and her step was slightly lighter than it had been going out. By the afternoon of the first day, Nathaniel had asked her if he could read the medical texts. By the afternoon of the second day, he had found a loose board on the kitchen floor that had been annoying her for months, and with his one usable arm and a patience that was something to witness had fixed it. By the morning of the third day, she had started to understand that something in the nature of this situation had changed, and she wasn't entirely sure when it had happened or what to do about it. It happened like this. She came downstairs early before full light expecting to find the house quiet and Nathaniel still asleep. Instead, she found him at the kitchen table with one of her notebooks open in front of him. The one where she kept her own notes on herbal preparations written in her father's shorthand that she had taught herself to read, and he was leaning forward his right elbow on the table, genuinely absorbed. He looked up when he heard her on the stairs. He didn't reach for an excuse or immediately close the notebook. He just looked at her. You found things he didn't record, he said. Your father. There are preparations in here that aren't in any of his textbooks. She stopped on the bottom stair. You can read his shorthand. I studied medicine briefly, he said. Before I went into business, I recognized the notation. She came down the rest of the stairs slowly and sat across from him at the table. Why did you stop? She said. Studying medicine. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, something in his voice had changed, some of the carefulness gone, or at least loosened. There were obligations, he said. Family. The kind you don't choose so much as inherit. That's vague, she said. The smallest possible version of a smile crossed his face. Yes, he said. It is. She looked at the notebook and at the page he'd been reading, which held her own observations about willow bark dosing in elderly patients. My father spent 30 years accumulating that, she said. He wrote it all down so it wouldn't be lost. He was afraid it would be lost. Is that why you continue his practice? Nathaniel said. To preserve it. She considered the question. No one had asked her that before. Most people assumed she continued because she had no other options, which was true, but incomplete. Partly, she said. Partly because people here don't have anyone else. He looked at her steadily. And partly because you're good at it. She met his eyes. Yes, she said. Partly that. He nodded, as if she had confirmed something he'd already decided was true. He closed the notebook carefully and pushed it back to her side of the table. I'm sorry I was reading it without permission, he said. I should have asked. Yes, she said. You should have. I'll ask in the future, he said. Something settled strangely in her chest at those words. In the future, as if it were already understood that there would be one. The roads should be passable by tomorrow, she said. So I understand, he said. Neither of them said anything else about tomorrow. That afternoon, a woman named Frances Holly arrived at the door. Frances Holly was 45, the wife of the largest merchant in the nearest town, and the kind of woman who gathered information the way other people gathered apples industriously, and with a view to later use. She had heard through the particular network of communication that existed among women of her acquaintance in small Virginia counties that Abigail Carter had a male guest who had been in her house for 3 days. She came ostensibly to check on Abigail and brought a pie. The pie was excellent cover. Abigail met her at the door. Abigail, darling, I heard about the terrible accident at Miller's Creek, Frances said, stepping inside with the confidence of a woman who had never been turned away from a door in her life. And I heard you've been nursing one of the travelers. Such a Christian thing to do. He needed medical attention, Abigail said. The road was impassable. Of course, of course. Frances was already looking past her toward the chair by the fire where Nathaniel was sitting with a medical text open in his lap. Nathaniel stood when she entered in the automatic, unhurried way of a man who had been performing that courtesy since childhood. Frances's eyes traveled over him in approximately 3 seconds, during which time Abigail could see her cataloging everything: the quality of the coat on the chair back, the cut of his waistcoat, the particular kind of stillness that belonged to men accustomed to controlling rooms. Mrs. Holly, Abigail said, this is Mr. Nathaniel. He was injured in the crash at the creek crossing. He'll be leaving tomorrow. Mr. Nathaniel, Frances said, extending her hand with a smile that had become approximately 40% warmer in the last 10 seconds. You are very fortunate to have found yourself in such capable hands. I am aware of that, Nathaniel said, looking briefly at Abigail before returning his attention to Frances with polite, absolute correctness. Frances stayed for 30 minutes. She asked Nathaniel several carefully indirect questions about his origins and his business, all of which he answered with perfect courtesy and absolute minimum of information. She looked around the small room with an expression she controlled well, but not completely the particular expression of someone calculating whether the situation they're observing is a problem or merely a curiosity. When she left, Abigail closed the door and stood with her back to it for a moment. She'll talk, she said. People generally do, Nathaniel said. He had sat back down, but wasn't looking at the book. He was looking at Abigail. In a small county, she said, talk becomes something you have to live with. Does it trouble you? She thought about it honestly. It would trouble me more, she said, if I'd done something wrong. I did what anyone with a medical bag and a conscience should have done. That's what I'll say, if anyone asks. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you shouldn't have to justify it. No, she agreed. But I will anyway, because that's how things work here. He looked at her with something in his expression. She was getting better at reading that quality of attention that had surprised her from the beginning. As if she were saying things that genuinely required consideration, rather than things that merely needed to be waited out. I'll make certain, he said quietly, that before I leave tomorrow, it's clear to anyone who might ask that my time here was entirely proper and that your care was entirely professional. She looked at him. How will you do that? I'll speak to the right people, he said simply. She didn't ask what that meant. She had the uneasy feeling that the right people meant something different in his context than it did in hers. What? He left the following morning. The road north had dried enough to be passable. Fowler had arranged for a hired wagon from a farm 2 miles east. The carriage would have to be retrieved and repaired, which was a separate project, and Nathaniel was dressed in his coat, his arm still bound, his face carrying the settled look of a man returning to a life he had not forgotten. He stood in front of Abigail's house and looked at her. "What do I owe you?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "Miss Carter." "I don't charge for emergency care," she said. "My father didn't either. It wasn't how he worked, and it's not how I work." He was quiet for a moment. He reached into his coat with his right hand and produced a card, a small rectangle of heavy cream-colored paper with letters printed on it in clean black ink, and held it out to her. She took it. She looked at it. The name on it was Nathaniel Whitmore. Beneath it was an address in Boston. Beneath that was a line that read, "Whitmore Land and Agricultural Development Principal." She had heard that name. Whitmore. She had heard it the way you heard the names of mountains, things large enough to be reference points for the entire landscape, things that didn't come down to the level of ordinary life. She looked up at him. He was watching her face read the card with that same quiet, careful attention. "Nathaniel Whitmore," she said. "Yes," he said. "The Nathaniel Whitmore." "I'm the only one I'm aware of," he said. She stood for a moment holding the card, and in that moment, she could feel the entire last 3 days rearranging themselves in her understanding. The quality of his clothes. The way he'd spoken about land investments with that faint incompleteness she had noticed and set aside. The way Fowler had deferred to him not as a hired man to a gentleman traveler, but with a particular practiced quality of regard that went deeper than professional obligation. She should have recognized it. She was a doctor's daughter. She knew how to read signs. She had simply not expected, had not let herself expect, because Nathaniel Whitmore was not a man who belonged in her world, and her world was the one she knew how to navigate. "You let me believe you were just a traveler," she said. Her voice was even. She worked to keep it that way. "I never said I was just a traveler," he said. "You let me think it," she said. He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "I did." "Why?" He was quiet for 1 moment. 2. Then, "Because you helped me before you knew my name, and I wanted—" He stopped, adjusted. "I needed to know what that felt like." She looked at him steadily. The card was still in her hand. She was aware of the weight of it, that heavy cream paper, those clean black letters, all the things they represented and all the distance they implied. "You needed to know what it felt like," she said, "to be helped by someone who didn't know you were worth helping." He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened slightly, and she understood that she had said it exactly right. She put the card in her apron pocket. "Travel safely. Mr. Whitmore," she said. She went back inside and closed the door. She stood in the middle of her small, clean room, with his card in her pocket, and the sound of the wagon moving away down the road, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel and could not quite name. She went to the window and looked out. The wagon was already gone around the bend in the road, and the morning was ordinary and warm, and exactly as it had always been, and she was exactly where she had always been, and nothing had changed, except that something had. She took the card out of her pocket and looked at it for a long moment. Then she put it in the back of her father's medical text between the pages on shoulder anatomy and went to make her rounds. 3 days passed. Then 4. Then 5. The road north did not clear the way Fowler had promised it would. A second storm came through on the evening of the first day, smaller than the one that had taken the bridge, but enough to turn the mud back to soup and keep the low-lying sections of the good road under standing water. The hired wagon that was supposed to carry Nathaniel Whitmore back to his life sat in the yard of the neighboring farm, going nowhere. Abigail learned this from Fowler, who appeared at her door on the morning of the second day with his hat in his hands and a look on his face, like a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say, and still wasn't confident in it. "I'm sorry to tell you, Miss Carter," Fowler said, "that the North Road is impassable still. The Good Creek tributary has come up over the low section past the Hartwell farm. Mr. He stopped. corrected himself with a slight tightening around the eyes. "The gentleman asks whether your hospitality might extend another day or two." Abigail looked past Fowler at the sky, which was gray and unhelpful. Then she looked at Fowler, who was clearly not comfortable asking, which meant the man who had sent him was clearly not comfortable being asked for. "Tell him he's welcome," she said. "And tell him to stop sending you to ask and just ask me himself." Fowler blinked. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real one, not a polite one. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Kig. Nathaniel appeared in the kitchen doorway 10 minutes later. He was wearing his waistcoat, but no coat, his left arm still bound across his chest, his expression carrying the particular quality of a man who had spent some time deciding how to begin a conversation and had still not entirely settled on an approach. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. She was at the table with her mortar and pestle grinding something that smelled sharply of pine and dried mint. She did not look up. "Fowler tells me you said—" "I said you could stay," she said. "And I said you could ask me yourself instead of sending him. Both of those things still stand." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I didn't want to presume." "You've been here 5 days," she said. "Presume is already established. Sit down." He sat. She kept grinding. The sound filled the kitchen, steady, rhythmic, the kind of sound that made silence comfortable rather than awkward. "What is that?" he said. "Pine resin and dried mint and beeswax, for Mrs. Hensley's knees. The cold and damp makes the joints seize, and this helps with the swelling better than anything else I've found." He watched her work. "You make it yourself?" "The apothecary in town charges 3 times what the ingredients cost, and compounds it weaker than it should be," she said. "So yes, I make it myself." "Have you told him that?" "I have," she said. "He told me women don't understand chemistry." A pause. "What did you say?" "I told him my father had been compounding medicines for 22 years and had taught me everything he knew, and that if he'd like to discuss the chemical properties of pine resin, I was available any Tuesday." She looked up briefly. "He has not taken me up on it." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, in a way that felt different from his other silences, denser somehow, like it contained more than the absence of speech. "He's wrong," Nathaniel said. "I know he's wrong," Abigail said calmly. "That was never the question. Mom." The morning moved the way mornings do when there is work to be done, and no particular reason to rush it. Abigail finished the compound for Mrs. Hensley, wrote 2 entries in her notebook, and reorganized the herb jars on the second shelf, which had been slightly out of order since the last time she'd gone through them in a hurry. Nathaniel stayed at the kitchen table. He didn't ask for things to do. He didn't fill the silence with unnecessary talking. He picked up one of her father's medical texts she'd told him on the second day that he could read them if he wanted, and read with the focused absorption of a man who actually knew what he was reading. That she thought was when she started watching him without intending to. Not obviously. Not the way you watch a person when you want them to know you're watching. The way you watch something that doesn't fit the category you've put it in and keeps making you reconsider the category. Nathaniel Whitmore. According to everything she knew about Nathaniel Whitmore, was a man of enormous wealth and considerable power, based in Boston, dealing in land on a scale that affected entire counties. He moved in circles she had never seen the outside of. He was exactly the kind of man who should have looked at her small house and her herb jars and her father's worn texts and seen something beneath his notice. He wasn't behaving like that man. He was behaving like someone who had been set down in a place that interested him and had decided to pay attention to it. She didn't know what to do with that, so she watched him quietly and kept it to herself. "There's a fence post down on the south side," she told Fowler at mid-morning. "Third one from the east corner. The ground's too soft to set it properly now, but it needs to be braced or the whole section will go." Fowler nodded with the immediate competence of a man who understood fences. "I'll see to it." "And the trough by the barn has a crack along the bottom seam. It's been slow leaking since spring. I've been meaning to pitch it." "I can do that," Fowler said. And then with a slight hesitation, "Miss Carter, I want to say you've been very kind, in a circumstance where many people wouldn't have been." She looked at him. What kind of people would leave an injured man in a creek bed? People who knew who he was, Fowler said, and what they might be expected to do about it afterward. She stood with that for a moment. What does that mean? Fowler's expression shifted into something careful and loyal. Only that there are people who'd have seen an opportunity, he said, and people who'd have wanted nothing to do with the responsibility. You were neither. That's notable, ma'am. He picked up his tools and went to see to the fence. Abigail stood in the doorway of the barn for a moment, thinking about what he'd said and what it implied about the life Nathaniel Whitmore lived when he wasn't in her kitchen reading her father's medical texts. She went back inside. Nathaniel was still at the table, but the book was closed now, and he was looking at the window with the expression of a man working through a problem that wasn't in the text. "How much do you know about land law in Virginia?" he said without turning from the window. She sat down across from him. "Enough to know it's complicated and usually ends badly for people who don't have lawyers." "Do you have lawyers?" "I have my father's deed and my own records," she said. "And I have the county register who knew my father personally and has not given me trouble, so far." "So far," he repeated. "Is there a reason you're asking about land law?" He turned from the window. Before the bridge collapsed, he said, "I was coming from a meeting in Charlottesville about a piece of land in the southern part of this county, a farm that's been in one family for 3 generations. She waited. "The current owner died last winter," he said. "Intestate, no will. His widow is claiming the property should pass to her through common usage, but the creditors are claiming the land against his debts. The county is not being particularly careful about whose interests it's protecting." "It rarely is," she said. "No." He agreed. "The widow's name is Danner, Martha Danner. Do you know her?" Abigail was quiet for a moment. "I know her," she said. "She came to my father when her youngest was born 8 years ago. She's a strong woman, practical. She doesn't ask for things." "She may need to ask soon," he said. "Or someone needs to ask on her behalf." She looked at him, really looked at him with the same attention she used when she was reading a patient and trying to understand what was happening below the surface. "You came through this county," she said slowly, "because of Martha Danner's land." "Among other things," he said. "And the men in Charlottesville who are claiming it against the debts are men I know," he said. "Professionally. They are not behaving correctly." She was quiet for a moment. "Can you stop them?" He held her gaze. "That," he said, "depends on several things that are still being determined. But you're trying." "Yes," he said. "I'm trying." She looked at him for a long moment, rearranging things again. She was getting accustomed to that, to the sense of the image she had of him, shifting slightly every time he said something, the way a picture becomes clearer when you keep adjusting the angle. "Why?" she said. "Martha Danner doesn't know you. Her land is worth something, but you have land that makes hers look like a kitchen garden. Why does it matter to you what happens to it?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "My mother was a widow. When my father died, there were men who tried to do exactly what is being done to Martha Danner. They had lawyers and leverage, and they were very certain they were going to win." He paused. "They didn't. But only because my father had made careful arrangements before he died, and because my mother was the kind of woman who did not sit quietly when someone tried to take what was hers." Another pause. "I have thought for most of my adult life about the women who weren't that lucky." The kitchen was very quiet. Abigail felt something move in her chest, not dramatic, not sudden. The slow, settling movement of something finding the place where it was supposed to be. "That's the real reason you're here," she said. "Not just the land investment." "No," he said. "Not just." The 6th day brought sunshine and a visitor Abigail had not expected and could not, looking back, say she was entirely surprised by. Caroline Harrington arrived at 11 in the morning in a carriage that was newer and better appointed than anything the good road had seen in recent memory, accompanied by a maid who sat in careful silence and a manner that occupied the space around her like weather. Caroline Harrington was 29, the only daughter of Edmund Harrington of the Harrington Tobacco Holdings, and this was the word people used in Abigail's county, though they meant different things by it, a handsome woman. Tall, well-dressed, composed in the way of someone who had been trained to composure from an early age. She knew Nathaniel Whitmore. This was obvious from the moment she walked through Abigail's door and saw him standing by the hearth, and the expression that crossed her face was not surprise, but something more complicated: relief and possession, and a quickly controlled flash of something else. Something calculating that Abigail caught and held. "Nathaniel," Caroline said, and her voice had the warmth of a woman who had been practicing that particular warmth for some time. "When your man reached my father's house yesterday with the news of the accident, I came immediately. Are you all right? Your shoulder." "It's healing," Nathaniel said. His tone was polite and warm, and Abigail noticed approximately the same tone he used for everyone. He didn't move toward Caroline. He didn't reach for her hand. He stood where he was by the hearth and let her cross the room to him. "I wasn't aware that Fowler had sent word. He thought it proper that someone who knew you should be informed," Caroline said. She touched his right arm lightly, the kind of touch that was communicating something to the room as much as to him. Then she turned to Abigail with a smile that was fully formed and entirely calibrated. "And you must be the woman who helped him. Miss Carter was it, I understand you've been providing shelter. How very good of you." "How very good of you" was the tone one used for a servant who had gone above their usual duties. Abigail recognized it. She had been hearing variations of it her whole life. "Abigail Carter," she said. "My father was the county physician. Mr. Whitmore's shoulder needed setting and the road was impassable. He's been a good patient." Caroline's smile didn't change. "Of course. Well, now that the road has cleared somewhat, I thought perhaps Nathaniel could come and recover properly at my father's house. We have far more room, and you've been so generous already." "I'm comfortable here," Nathaniel said. Caroline turned back to him. The smile stayed in place, but something behind it adjusted. "Of course, if you're not well enough to move." "I'm well enough," he said. "I'm comfortable here." A pause. Brief, but the kind that everyone in the room felt. "I see," Caroline said. She didn't look at Abigail. That Abigail thought was perhaps more telling than if she had. Caroline stayed for an hour. She sat in the chair that had been Nathaniel's chair, the good one by the hearth, and talked with the ease of a woman accustomed to managing the conversation around her. She spoke about her father's holdings and the summer social season, and two people in Richmond who had apparently done something interesting at an assembly. She asked Nathaniel careful questions about his business in Charlottesville and received careful answers. She did not speak to Abigail again. She did not ask Abigail a question. She managed with the precision of long practice to behave as though Abigail were furniture that happened to have opinions. Abigail spent the hour doing what needed doing. She had 2 preparations to finish and a delivery to make, and she did not allow herself to feel anything in particular about Caroline Harrington until Caroline had been gone for 30 minutes and she was alone in the kitchen. Then she sat down at the table and was honest with herself. Caroline Harrington wanted to marry Nathaniel Whitmore. That was not a guess. That was visible in every calibrated word and every careful touch and every controlled pause. And Caroline Harrington was the kind of woman who made sense in the context of Nathaniel Whitmore's life. The right family, the right connections, the right understanding of how wealth and position operated. Abigail Carter, the late doctor's daughter with her herb jars and her worn notebooks and her 2 rooms and her outstanding debt to the county land office, did not make sense in that context. She had known this from the moment she read the name on his card. She had just apparently allowed herself to forget it for a few days. She stood up, finished the pine resin compound, and told herself firmly that forgetting things was a temporary condition, and she was done with it. Nathaniel came to the kitchen an hour later. He sat down across from her without being invited, which by now was simply the way things worked, and looked at her face with the attention that she had started to find either very comforting or very alarming, depending on what she was feeling when he did it. "You're angry," he said. "I'm not angry," she said. She was writing in her notebook. She kept writing. "You're something," he said. "I'm working." "Abigail." She looked up. It was the first time he'd used her name without the miss in front of it, and the lack of it hit like a change in air pressure. "She's going to talk," Abigail said. "Not the way Mrs. Holly talks. Mrs. Holly is just curious. Miss Harrington is going to say something specific, something that requires a response." "What makes you think that?" "Because I watched her," Abigail said. "She came here to see if there was something she needed to manage, and she decided there was." He was quiet for a moment. "And is there?" She looked at him squarely. "I don't know," she said. "Is there?" He held her gaze for a long moment. "Caroline and I have known each other since we were children," he said. "Our families have been in business together. She has certain—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Expectations that are not based on anything I've offered her." "Have you told her that—" "Not as directly as I should have," he said. "Then she has reasonable grounds for her expectations," Abigail said, "whether you intended them or not." He was quiet. The muscle in his jaw moved once. "Yes," he said. "That's fair." "I'm not saying it to be fair," she said. "I'm saying it because it's true, and you seem like a man who does better with the truth than without it." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was doing something she couldn't fully read, not the careful blankness that she'd first taken for coldness, and had since learned was simply control, but something beneath that layer, something less guarded. "You're right," he said. "On all counts." "Good," she said. She went back to her notebook. He didn't leave. "There's something else," he said. She kept writing. "Then say it." "I spoke to Fowler this morning about Martha Danner," he said. "I asked him to go to the county register and request the original deed of sale from when her husband bought the land, 23 years ago." Abigail's pen stopped. "Why?" "Because in Virginia, certain land transactions from that period were registered under a secondary clause that provides inheritance protection to surviving spouses in the absence of a will," he said. "It's rarely invoked because most people don't know it exists. But if the Danner deed was registered under that statute, the creditor's claim has no legal standing." She stared at him. "How do you know about that statute?" "I studied land law before I studied medicine," he said. "And I've been in enough county disputes to know where the gaps are." He paused. "I sent a letter this morning to my lawyer in Richmond. I asked him to review the Danner case." She was quiet for a long moment. "You've been working on this the whole time." "Since the third day," he said. "I needed to know more about how this county's register operates before I moved." She put her pen down. She looked at him. He looked back. "Why are you telling me?" she said. "Because you know Martha Danner," he said. "And because I thought if the statute applies, she might hear it better from someone she already trusts than from a stranger with a Boston address." Abigail was quiet. She could hear the sound of Fowler outside working on something near the barn. She could hear the afternoon birds. She could hear her own breathing, which was doing something slightly different from usual. "You want me to be the one to tell her," she said. "If it comes to that," he said. "Yes." "What if the statute doesn't apply?" "Then we find another way," he said. "But I think it will apply." She looked at him for a long time. There were things she wanted to say, things about the distance between his world and hers, about the difference between a man who could afford to help people as a matter of personal principle, and a woman who helped people because there was no one else. But none of them were quite right. What she said was, "Then we find out together." He nodded once. The particular kind of nod that meant a decision had been made. Two things happened that evening. The first was that Fowler returned from the county register with the Danner deed, a document folded inside a linen sleeve and showing its age at the creases, and laid it on the table between Nathaniel and Abigail, with the expression of a man delivering something he hoped was good news. Nathaniel opened it carefully with his right hand. Abigail held the edge so it lay flat. They read it together, heads close over the document, and when Nathaniel's finger stopped at a line of printed text near the bottom of the first page, Abigail read it twice to be certain she was reading it correctly. "There it is," Nathaniel said. His voice was quiet, but there was something in it, not triumph exactly, but the controlled version of it. "The secondary clause," she said. "Registered and witnessed, 1793. He looked up at her. "She's protected. They can't touch the land." Abigail let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "She doesn't know this." "No. She's been—" Abigail stopped. She thought of Martha Danner, who had come to her father 8 years ago with a newborn on her hip, and had not once in all the years since asked for anything from anyone. She thought of Martha Danner not knowing there was a clause in her husband's deed that meant she wasn't losing the land. "She's been afraid for months." "I know," Nathaniel said. "You're going to have to move on this quickly," Abigail said. "The men in Charlottesville, if they file before your lawyer, can get the deed in front of a judge." "I've already written," he said. "The letter went this morning." She looked at him. "You sent the letter before you knew the clause was there." "I was fairly certain it would be," he said. "I had Fowler request the deed before we had the conversation, so I could verify rather than hope." She stared at him. "You planned all of that." "I tend to," he said. "Before you told me." "I didn't know if you'd want to be involved," he said. "I didn't want to ask you to care about something that might not be solvable." She was quiet for a moment. "That was considerate," she said. "Infuriating, but considerate." Something crossed his face that was unmistakably, this time, a smile. "I'll take infuriating," he said. "It's an improvement on most of what I usually get." The second thing that happened was the letter. It arrived with the evening mail delivery, which in their part of the county meant a boy on a horse from the town post office, and it was addressed to Nathaniel. The return address was Boston. His partner's handwriting she assumed from the way Nathaniel's expression changed slightly when he saw it. He read it in the kitchen while she finished the evening preparations. She didn't ask about it. It wasn't her business. But when he folded it and set it on the table, he didn't move for a long moment, and she looked up. His face was entirely controlled. Which she had learned was the version of his face he used when something required effort to keep controlled. "News," she said. He looked up. He made a decision about something she could see the making of it the moment it resolved. "There's a business matter in Boston that can't be delayed past next week," he said. "The road will clear tomorrow. I'll need to leave by the morning after." She nodded. "Your shoulder should be—" "The shoulder will manage," he said. "I've traveled in worse condition." He paused. "Before I go, I'll speak to the county register myself about the Danner situation. Establish the legal ground. And I'll make certain my lawyer knows to move quickly once I'm back in Boston. You'll follow it from there." "I'll handle it from there," he said. The difference in those words was not small. She looked at him. "You came through this county by accident," she said. "The bridge, the storm, all of it. And now you're managing a widow's legal case from Boston." "I was coming through this county on purpose," he said. "The bridge was the accident." He paused. "And I would have found the Danner situation eventually. The storm just moved the timeline. But you found it here," she said. "In my kitchen." "Yes," he said. "In your kitchen." They were quiet. The kind of quiet that had a shape to it now, not empty, not uncomfortable. The kind that had accumulated over 6 days and had its own weight. "Why does it feel like something is ending," she said, "when you're not supposed to be here in the first place?" He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Because some things happen on their correct schedule, regardless of what you planned." She looked down at the table. She looked at the Danner deed still open between them, and at her notebook beside it, and at his hand resting near the edge of the table. His right hand, the one he'd given her when she pulled him out of the wreck. "I'll go see Martha Danner tomorrow morning," she said, "before you leave. Tell her what we found. Give her something to hold on to before the lawyers start their work." "I'll come with you," he said. She looked up. "That's better," he said simply. "If she sees the deed and hears it explained by someone who can answer legal questions, it carries more weight. You know her. I know the law. Together it's more than either of us separately." She thought about pushing back on this. She thought about the fact that tomorrow he would be gone, and things would return to their ordinary shape, and the good road would be exactly the road it had always been. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow morning. Early." "Early," he agreed. She stood and began clearing the table, and he picked up the Danner deed and folded it with the same careful attention he gave to everything, and outside the window, the last light of the day was going, and the evening birds were starting, and the kitchen smelled like pine resin and dried mint. It was, she thought, a very ordinary evening. It was also, she thought, one she was going to remember for a very long time. Martha Danner's farm was 2 miles south on a road that the week's rain had left unpredictable in patches, and they went on horseback. Nathaniel on a horse borrowed from the neighboring farm, riding carefully with his bound arm, and Abigail on her own gray mare, who was reliable, if not elegant, which had always been Abigail's primary requirement in a horse. Martha Danner was in the yard when they arrived. She was a small woman, iron-haired and straight-backed, with the burned-in look of someone who had worked outdoors most of her life and didn't regard that as a complaint. She was splitting kindling when they rode up, which she did not stop doing until she had finished the piece she was working on, and Abigail respected her for that. "Abigail Carter," Martha said. Her eyes moved to Nathaniel with careful assessing directness. "Who's this?" "His name is Nathaniel Whitmore," Abigail said. "He's a lawyer, land developer, and legal advisor," Nathaniel said, swinging down from the horse in a way that did not betray the difficulty his shoulder was causing him, which Abigail noticed, and he clearly intended her not to. He walked toward Martha Danner with the particular straightforward quality of a man who understood that the way he crossed a yard could determine how the next hour went. He stopped at a respectful distance and looked at her straight. "Mrs. Danner, we have something to show you about your husband's deed. I believe it's going to be good news." Martha Danner looked at him for a long moment. She looked at Abigail. She drove her hatchet into the splitting stump. "You'd better come inside then," she said. They were in Martha Danner's kitchen for an hour. It took 10 minutes to explain the secondary clause. It took another 20 minutes for Martha to ask every question she could think of, which were sharp questions, precise, practical, aimed at the exact places where false hope could hide, and for Nathaniel to answer every single one of them with the same direct, unhurried accuracy. He didn't perform reassurance. He gave her information and let her do what she was clearly capable of doing, which was making her own assessment of the facts. At the end, Martha Danner sat for a long moment with the deed in front of her and her hands flat on the table. Then she said, "Why are you doing this?" Nathaniel said, "Because it's right and it can be done." Martha looked at him. "That's not a sufficient reason for a man to ride 2 miles out of his way on a borrowed horse." A pause. "My mother was a widow," Nathaniel said. "Men tried to take her land too. She kept it. I want you to keep yours." Martha Danner was silent for a moment. Then she looked at Abigail. "Your father," she said, "would have liked this one." Abigail felt something move in her face that she was fairly sure showed. "Don't tell him that," she said. "He's already difficult enough." Martha's mouth curved. Nathaniel, on the other side of the table, looked at his own hands. On the ride back, they didn't talk much. The road was better in the morning light, drying fast now that the rain had stopped, and the horses moved easily through the early warmth. Somewhere along the middle section of the road, Nathaniel pulled his horse alongside hers, and they rode level for a while without speaking. And the silence was the same particular quality of silence that the kitchen had gotten to the kind that meant something, rather than nothing. "She's going to be all right," Abigail said, not asking. "She's going to be all right," he confirmed. "My lawyer will move by the end of the week. The creditor's claim will be dismissed before it gets to a hearing. And you'll follow that from Boston." "Until it's done," he said. She looked at the road ahead. "You do that a lot," she said. "Start things, and then—" She paused. "And then," he said. "And then go back to the larger world," she said. "The one that runs on a different set of rules than this road." He was quiet for a moment. "The world I go back to," he said, "is less interesting than this road." She looked at him. He was looking at the road ahead, his profile level, the morning light on the side of his face. "Don't say things like that," she said. "Why not?" "Because you leave tomorrow," she said. "And saying things like that makes tomorrow harder than it needs to be." He turned to look at her. His expression had that quality again, the unguarded one, the one she suspected very few people ever saw. "What if I don't want it to be easy?" he said. She held his gaze for 1 moment, 2, 3. Then she looked back at the road and kept riding and didn't answer. But she didn't answer in the way that was itself an answer, and she suspected from the quality of the silence that followed that he understood exactly what she hadn't said. He left on a Tuesday. Abigail knew he was going. She had known since the letter from Boston, since the conversation in the kitchen, since the ride back from Martha Danner's farm, when she had not answered his question, and he had understood her silence exactly. She had 6 days of knowing it was coming, which she had thought would make the morning itself easier. It didn't. She was already in the yard when Fowler brought the borrowed horse around. She was doing what she always did in the early morning, checking the kitchen garden, pulling anything the week's wet had started to rot. The kind of work that kept her hands busy and her mind usefully occupied. She was not waiting. She was working. The distinction mattered to her, even if it would have fooled no one who knew her well. Nathaniel came out of the house with his coat on and his bag in his right hand, his left arm still bound, but carrying less of the defensive tension it had held in the first days. He moved better. She had noticed that yesterday, and the day before, the careful way he'd been testing the shoulder's range, slowly, methodically, the way a man does when he doesn't want to admit he's doing it. He set the bag down and looked at her. "The stitches," he said. "They should come out in 4 days. I know when to remove my own stitches," she said. "I know you do." He paused. "I'm leaving something on the kitchen table." "Nathaniel." "It isn't payment," he said. His voice was quiet, but very definite. "It's a letter to the county commissioner about the bridge at Miller's Creek. I've detailed the cost of the repair and indicated my willingness to underwrite it if the county fails to act within 30 days. She stopped. She looked at him. "You can't. The bridge is a public safety hazard," he said. "Someone else will go through it before winter if nothing is done. I'm in a position to prevent that. So I am." He picked up the bag. "There's also a letter to my lawyer. He knows to contact you directly if anything develops with the Danner case that requires your involvement." She stood very still. "You wrote that before you knew I'd agree to be involved." "I wrote it this morning," he said. "After I knew. The horses were ready." Fowler was up on the borrowed wagon looking at the road with the careful neutrality of a man who was very good at not hearing conversations he wasn't part of. Nathaniel looked at her. He did not reach for her hand. He did not say anything designed to sound like a promise. He looked at her the way he had looked at her from the beginning, with that complete level attention that she had stopped trying to explain to herself somewhere around the 3rd day, and had simply accepted as the way he was. "Thank you," he said, "for the shoulder, for Martha Danner, for the 6 days." "You repaired my kitchen floor," she said. "I think we're even." Something moved in his expression. "Not remotely," he said. He climbed up to the wagon seat beside Fowler, which she could see cost him something in his left shoulder that he refused to show, and Fowler clicked to the horse, and the wagon moved off down the good road heading north. She watched until it was gone around the bend. Then she went inside and found the 2 letters on the kitchen table weighted down by her father's old paperweight, the one shaped like a river stone, the one she'd had since she was a child. She sat down and read the one to the county commissioner first. It was a masterwork of polite, precise, utterly unanswerable legal pressure. She almost smiled. Then she sat for a while in the chair that had been his chair for 6 days, and looked at the door and allowed herself exactly 10 minutes of feeling whatever she was feeling before she put it away and got up and went to work. 10 minutes was what her father had always said. Feel the thing he'd told her, or the thing will find a way to feel itself at a worse time. 10 minutes, then get up. She got up. God. 2 weeks passed. They passed the way weeks do when you are busy, and the work is real, not quickly exactly, but without the slow drag of empty time. She saw Mrs. Hensley twice, and Mr. Albright's youngest, who had developed a cough, and the Mercer family's new baby, who was small but determined, which she told the mother was actually the better combination. She made her rounds. She kept her records. She restocked 3 of the herb jars that had run low and ordered 1 ingredient from the apothecary in town, paying for it with coin she'd been saving since March. She did not hear from Nathaniel Whitmore. She had not expected to. She was not waiting for it. She was clear on both of those things. Francis Hawley came by on the 4th day after his departure, ostensibly to return a borrowed preserving jar, and spent 40 minutes discussing the various observations that the county had made about the week's events. She delivered this information with the particular relish of someone who genuinely believes she is performing a service by keeping her neighbors informed. People are saying, Francis said with careful delicacy, that he was here a very long time for a man with a simple injury. The road was impassable for 6 of those days, Abigail said, as everyone in this county is aware. Of course, and of course you behaved entirely properly. I'm sure anyone with sense can see that. Francis paused in the way that preceded the part that actually mattered to her. Though Caroline Harrington has been saying, What has Miss Harrington been saying? Abigail said, flat without inflection. Francis looked briefly startled by the directness, then recalibrated. Only that it was an irregular situation, that a woman in your position alone with a man of his standing for so many days, she expressed concern for your reputation. She said she felt it was her Christian duty to mention it to a few people. Abigail set down the jar she'd been labeling. She turned and looked at Francis Hawley with the careful level regard she used when a patient was telling her something they believed, and she needed to understand without reacting. My father treated this county for 22 years, she said. He went into any house that needed him at any hour, regardless of who was in it or what people might say. I do the same. If Miss Harrington has a different understanding of Christian duty, she's entitled to it. Francis looked at her for a moment. Then she said more quietly, You should know that she's been to see the county commissioner about the letters. Abigail went very still. What letters? The letter from Mr. Whitmore, Francis said. About the bridge. She told the commissioner that she felt it was inappropriate for a man of Whitmore's standing to be making county improvements through informal channels, through a third party. Francis paused. She seemed to feel it suggested a level of familiarity that warranted attention. Abigail stood very still and thought about several things at once. The letter on the kitchen table, the county commissioner, and the particular way Caroline Harrington had stood in her kitchen and looked at her chair and her hearth and her herbs like a woman making an inventory of things that needed to be removed. Thank you for telling me, she said. Abigail, Francis said. She has the commissioner's ear. Her father has his business. If she decides to pursue this, then I'll manage it, Abigail said. As I manage everything. Francis left 10 minutes later, looking faintly worried, which was the most genuine emotion Abigail had seen from her in years. Abigail stood in the kitchen and felt the specific kind of anger that wasn't hot, but cold, the kind that came from understanding exactly what was happening and why, and finding it entirely contemptible, and knowing that contemptible things still required managing. The first real blow came on a Thursday. She was returning from the Mercer farm saddlebag over her shoulder when she saw the 2 men in front of her house. Both were well dressed by county standards. One she recognized as Deputy Commissioner Aldrich, a narrow man with the perpetual expression of someone who has been given authority slightly above his competence. The other she didn't know. They were waiting for her, which meant they had been told when to come, which meant someone had known her schedule, which meant someone had been watching it. She walked up to them without altering her pace. "Miss Carter," Aldrich said. "Mr. Aldrich," she said. "What can I do for you?" "This is Mr. Sims," Aldrich said. "He's counsel to the county commissioner's office. There are a few questions." "About the letter," she said. Aldrich blinked. "About the situation with Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes. There have been some concerns raised." "By Miss Harrington," she said. Another blink. "By several concerned citizens," he said with the careful phrasing of a man covering his source. "About the nature of your relationship with Mr. Whitmore, and about whether his letter regarding the bridge was made through appropriate." "Mr. Aldrich," she said, "Nathaniel Whitmore's carriage went through the Miller's Creek Bridge during a storm because that bridge has been in unsafe condition for 4 months, and your office has failed to repair it. He is a land developer with substantial financial resources who offered to address a public safety hazard because it nearly killed him. The letter communicating that offer was left in my kitchen because he stayed in my house for 6 days while the road was impassable. His staying was a matter of medical necessity, and I have complete records of his treatment and condition. Is there a specific legal question you'd like me to answer?" Aldrich looked at Sims. Sims looked at his papers. "There's also a question," Sims said more carefully, "about whether you've been practicing medicine without a license, given that you're not a licensed physician." She looked at him. "My father was licensed by this county for 22 years. I have been providing care in continuity of his practice under the provision for extended family practice that the county established in 1808. I have documentation. Would you like to see it now, or shall I bring it to the commissioner's office?" A pause. "The commissioner's office," Sims said. "Thursday of next week." "I'll be there," she said. She walked past them and opened her door and went inside and closed it. She stood in the middle of her kitchen and breathed for a moment. Then she went to her father's files and started pulling documentation. She did not write to Nathaniel. She thought about it twice and talked herself out of it both times. She had managed her own affairs for 3 years without Nathaniel Whitmore's involvement, and the fact that someone was using his presence here as a weapon against her did not mean that the appropriate solution was to involve him further. It meant the appropriate solution was to be so thoroughly documented and correct in her own conduct that the weapon had nothing to strike. She spent 3 evenings going through her father's files and her own records. She organized everything into a sequence that was clear and unambiguous. She wrote a brief legal summary. She was not a lawyer, but she had watched her father handle enough property disputes and billing arguments to know how to construct a factual argument, and she had it reviewed by old Henry Marsh, who had studied law before he'd taken up farming, and who read it over his glasses in 15 minutes and said, "This is good. This is very good, actually. Where did you learn to write like this?" "My father," she said. "Of course," Henry said. She was ready. What she was not ready for was the letter that arrived on a Wednesday morning, the day before her meeting with the county commissioner. It came from Boston. The handwriting on the outside was not Nathaniel's. It was a woman's hand, precise and formal, and the return address was a law office on State Street. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and inside that sheet of paper was something that Abigail read once quickly, and then put down, and then picked up, and read again more slowly, and then set on the table with both hands flat on either side of it, and stood very still. It was a letter from a woman named Mrs. Helena Whitmore, Nathaniel's mother. It was in its way a remarkable document. It was polite, it was literate, it was structurally impeccable, and it was in every important sense a warning. Mrs. Whitmore had heard from sources she did not name, but whose identity Abigail could construct without difficulty about the week in the farmhouse. She wanted Abigail to understand she wrote that she bore her no ill will, that she was certain Abigail was a fine woman, that her medical care of Nathaniel had been admirable. But she also wanted her to understand that Nathaniel had obligations to his family, to his business, to the continuation of the Whitmore name and holdings that were not merely personal preferences, but structural realities. That men in his position sometimes found themselves, she used the word, distracted by encounters that were, however, genuine, not practical. And that Abigail, as a woman of good sense, would surely understand that the kindest thing she could do for everyone involved was to allow the connection to resolve itself naturally, without encouragement, without correspondence, without hope, that last word used as a noun but functioning in context as a verdict. Abigail read it a third time. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the back of her father's medical text next to Nathaniel's card between the pages on shoulder anatomy. She stood there for a moment with her hand on the cover of the book. She was not crying. She didn't cry often, and she wasn't going to now. But something in her chest had the feeling of a joint moving into an alignment that was correct but painful. The same sensation she'd felt in her hands when she'd set Nathaniel's shoulder in the wreck. That definitive, unavoidable moment of things being put back where they belonged. This was where things belonged. She was Dr. Carter's daughter on the good road. He was the Whitmore heir in Boston. His mother had written her a letter that was designed to be unanswerable, and it was unanswerable, and she knew it. She made herself breakfast. She went through her files one more time. She was ready for tomorrow. The meeting with the county commissioner lasted 2 hours. Commissioner Beavis was a large man with small eyes and the political instincts of someone who had been in office long enough to know when he was being used and to decide whether being used was acceptable. He sat behind his desk with Aldrich on his left and Sims on his right and looked at Abigail across the width of a large mahogany surface with the expression of a man who would rather be somewhere else. She put her documentation on the desk, all of it. The practice license, the patient records, the continuity provision, the treatment notes on Nathaniel Whitmore, the timeline of the road's impassability corroborated by the accounts of 3 neighboring farmers. She answered every question directly and completely and did not embellish. She was there for an hour before the door opened and Caroline Harrington walked in. She had not been announced, which meant she had been expected. Caroline sat in the chair against the wall, not at the desk, which would have been too obvious, but close enough that her presence shaped the room, and she looked at Abigail with the composed, pleasant expression of someone who has arranged the stage and is now observing the performance. "Miss Harrington," Commissioner Beavis said with a cordiality that told Abigail everything she needed to know about where his interests lay. "I wasn't aware. I only came to offer any additional context that might be helpful," Caroline said. "I do know Mr. Whitmore personally. If there are questions about his character or intentions—" "His character and intentions are not under discussion," Abigail said. Caroline looked at her. "Of course not. I only meant—" "I know what you meant," Abigail said. Her voice was level, not raised. Level the way her father's had been when he was most serious. "Miss Harrington, I've been providing documented medical care to this county for 3 years, in continuity of my father's licensed practice. The situation at my house was the result of a bridge failure that your own office," she glanced at Beavis, "has failed to address for 4 months. If there are legal questions about my practice, I'm here to answer them. If this meeting is about something other than legal questions, I'd like to know that directly." A silence. Caroline's pleasant expression did not change. "I think we all simply want to ensure that everything is above board," she said. "For your sake as much as anyone's. Your reputation is valuable, Miss Carter. We'd all hate to see it damaged by association with an irregular situation." "My reputation," Abigail said, "is based on my work, as it should be." "Of course," Caroline said. "Though in this county, as I'm sure you know, a woman's reputation depends on more than her work." The room was very quiet. Commissioner Beavis cleared his throat. He looked at the documentation on his desk. He looked at Sims. He looked at the space between Abigail and Caroline with the expression of a man calculating the cost of various available decisions. "Miss Carter," he said, "your documentation appears to be in order. The practice license provision is clear. There are no grounds to question your medical conduct." He paused. "As for the letter regarding the bridge, I've reviewed Mr. Whitmore's offer, and the county intends to accept it. The repair will be contracted within the month." It was not an apology. It was not even really a vindication. But it was the county commissioner saying in the presence of Caroline Harrington that Abigail's records were clean and her practice was legal. She gathered her documents. She stood. She looked at Beavis. "Thank you," she said. "I hope the bridge is repaired before someone else goes through it." She did not look at Caroline as she left. She didn't need to. Sure. She was halfway down the main street of town when she heard her name. She turned. It was Martha Danner. Martha was coming out of the general store with a parcel under one arm, and she was moving with a different quality than the last time Abigail had seen her, not just straight-backed, which she had always been, but lighter, as if something had been redistributed. "The lawyer came," Martha said without preamble when she'd crossed the street. "Whitmore's man, from Richmond. He came 3 days ago." Abigail looked at her. And the creditor's claim is dismissed," Martha said. "The secondary clause was filed and accepted. They can't touch the land." She paused. "They tried to argue it. The lawyer he was something, that man, took everything they had and turned it into nothing in about 40 minutes. A pause. "He said Mr. Whitmore sent specific instructions, that it was to be handled completely, no loose ends, no room for future challenges." Abigail stood on the main street of the town she'd lived in her whole life and felt the particular fullness of a feeling she did not have words for that was made of several things at once. Relief for Martha, and the ache of something she hadn't let herself name, and the strange, close grief of realizing that a man could do something this significant from a distance, as if distance were simply a detail he'd decided to manage. "He did it," she said. "He did it," Martha confirmed. She looked at Abigail steadily. "He's a good man." "Yes," Abigail said. "He is." Martha held her gaze for a moment longer than the sentence required. Then she shifted her parcel and nodded and went on her way with the walk of a woman who still had land under her feet. Abigail was home by mid-afternoon. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter from Helena Whitmore in front of her and thought about what it meant that he had completed the Danner case, after leaving with the thoroughness she would have expected of him, with that particular quality of follow-through that she had identified as one of the truest things about him. She thought about what it meant that his mother had written to her, that someone had told his mother about a week on the good road, that the letter had been polite and devastating and had still found her prepared enough not to be destroyed by it. She thought about what it meant that she wasn't destroyed. She had lived on this road alone for 3 years. She had a practice and a debt and a kitchen garden and a gray mare and her father's texts, and she had made something real from those things, and nobody had given it to her, and nobody could take it away. She was not a woman who collapsed when she was pushed. She had learned that about herself in the year after her father died, in the difficult months when the debt was large and the practice was uncertain, and she'd had nothing but the medical bag and the work. She was not going to collapse for Caroline Harrington. She was not going to collapse for Helena Whitmore's letter. She was not going to collapse for a man who had spent 6 days in her kitchen and left a letter about a bridge on her table and looked at her on the good road like she was something worth understanding. She was not going to collapse. But she was not untouched, and sitting alone in the kitchen in the afternoon light with the letter on the table in front of her, she allowed herself to know the difference between those two things. She allowed herself to know that the days when the world had disappeared, when it had been only this kitchen, and the Danner deed, and the sound of Fowler's hammer on the fence post, and Nathaniel at the table with her father's books. Those days had been real. They had happened. She had been seen in those days with a completeness she hadn't known she was missing, and that was real too. And she allowed herself to know that it had ended, not because she had done anything wrong, not because he had, but because his mother had written her a letter, and the letter was correct, and the world was what it was. She folded the letter. She stood up. She went to the shelf and took down the jar of dried chamomile and the willow bark tincture, packed them in her bag, and went to see Mrs. Hensley. Her knees weren't going to wait for anyone to finish being sad. She had been back for an hour washing her hands at the kitchen basin when she heard the horse in the yard. She heard Fowler's voice first. She recognized it before she placed it because her mind was elsewhere, and then the recognition arrived, and she went very still. She dried her hands. She opened the kitchen door. Fowler was dismounting in the yard, and behind him on a horse that was not borrowed. This time a good dark horse, well-bred, clearly his own, was Nathaniel Whitmore. He looked road-worn. He'd been riding for a while, that was visible. His coat was dusty, his jaw carrying 2 days of growth, his left arm no longer bound, but held with the slight deliberate care of a man being careful with something that was recently healed. He looked at her from horseback. She stood in the door of her kitchen and looked back at him. "You left 3 weeks ago," she said. "I came back," he said. "I can see that." She crossed her arms. "Why?" He dismounted. He handed Fowler the reins without taking his eyes off her. He crossed the yard and stopped 6 feet from her respectful distance, the distance he'd used with Martha Danner, the distance of a man who understood that some thresholds required permission. "Because my lawyer sent word that the Danner case was resolved," he said. "And because the Boston business is handled. And because—" He stopped. He looked at her with the full weight of that attention she had spent 3 weeks trying to stop feeling the absence of. "Because your kitchen is where I do my best thinking, and I have a problem I can't solve from Boston." "What problem?" she said. He reached into his coat with his right hand and withdrew an envelope. He held it out to her. She looked at it. She recognized the handwriting on the outside immediately, the precise, formal hand of a woman who had been trained to precision. Helena Whitmore, Boston. She looked up at him sharply. "You know about the letter. I found out 4 days ago," he said. "When my mother mentioned in the course of a conversation about something else that she had written to you." Something moved through his face, not anger exactly, but the controlled version of it, contained but unmistakable. "I want you to know that I did not ask her to do that. I did not know she had. And I am—" He paused, and the pause was the kind that meant the word "coming" was the exact one, and not a substitute. "I am deeply sorry for what it must have said." Abigail looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You've read it." "She told me the substance of it," he said. "I didn't need to read it." She leaned against the doorframe and kept her arms crossed and looked at him with the same careful assessment she gave to everything she needed to understand. "Your mother isn't wrong," she said. He met her eyes. "About what?" "About the distance between your world and mine," she said. "About the practical complications. About the things you owe to your family and your name." She kept her voice even, steady, her father's voice when he was telling a patient something true and difficult. "She isn't wrong about any of it, Nathaniel." "No," he said. "She isn't wrong about the facts." He took 1 step toward her. Still outside the threshold, he hadn't come inside, and she noted that, and she thought he knew she was noting it. "But she's wrong about the conclusion." "What conclusion?" "That the facts settle the question," he said. "That the complications add up to an answer without the person who actually matters being consulted." Abigail stood very still. "That's what the letter was doing," he said. "Not informing you, deciding for you. And she had no right to do that. And I have spent 4 days on a horse thinking about the fact that I almost let her." He held her gaze. "I almost didn't come back. Because she has a way of making her conclusions feel like logic, and I was not thinking clearly." "What made you come back?" Abigail said. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower. "Martha Danner," he said. "My lawyer sent me a summary of the meeting. He wrote that Mrs. Danner said when she was thanking him, he wrote that she said, 'Tell Mr. Whitmore that Abigail Carter is the truest person in this county, and tell him not to be a fool.'" The afternoon light was long and flat and quiet. Abigail looked at Nathaniel Whitmore, standing in her yard with road dust on his coat and the truth on his face, and she felt the joint-setting feeling again, that clarity that was also pain, and this time it was accompanied by something else. something that felt uncomfortably and irrevocably like the beginning of something rather than the end. "You should come inside," she said. She stepped back from the door. He crossed the threshold. He sat in the chair that had been his chair for 6 days, and the kitchen rearranged itself around him the way a room does when the person who belongs in it comes back. Abigail put the kettle on. She did it because it was something to do with her hands, and because the domestic ordinaries of making tea gave her a moment to think without her face being visible to him. She was not ready for her face to be entirely visible to him yet. She needed 30 more seconds, and the kettle gave them to her. "How is the shoulder?" she said with her back to him. "Better," he said. "Not right yet, but better." "Are you using it carefully?" "Carefully enough?" "That's not the same as carefully," she said. "No." He agreed. "It isn't." She turned around with 2 cups and set one in front of him and sat across the table. She looked at him. He looked back. The room was quiet in the particular way it had been quiet during the 6 days, not empty quiet, but full quiet, the kind with weight in it. "Tell me what you want," she said. "Exactly. Not what your mother wants and not what the situation requires. What you want." He wrapped his right hand around the cup. He looked at it for a moment. "I want to stay," he said. "Not pass through, not manage things from Boston and send lawyers in my place." He looked up. "I want to know if there's a version of things where I stay." She heard what he was not saying along with what he was. He was not saying he had decided to stay. He was asking if staying was something that could exist not in the abstract, but with her in this kitchen on this road. He was asking permission to want it. "There are complications," she said. "I know what the complications are," he said. "Your mother." "My mother made a decision that wasn't hers to make," he said. "I love her. She was trying to protect what she understands as my interests. She was wrong. I've told her that." Abigail stared at him. "You told her?" "Before I rode out," he said. "I told her that writing to you was not acceptable, that the decision about my life was mine to make, and yours to agree to or refuse, and that if she had concerns about my choices, she was welcome to express them to me directly. As she always has been." The room was very quiet. "How did she take that?" Abigail said. "Badly," he said. "And then better." A pause. "She's a practical woman. What she wants is for me to be settled and purposeful and not making decisions she considers irrational. If I can demonstrate that a decision is neither irrational nor unsettled, she generally comes around." He held her gaze. Eventually, Abigail looked at him for a long moment. There was something almost impossible about this, about the fact that 3 weeks ago she had sat in this kitchen with his mother's letter and accepted with the practiced practicality she had inherited from her father that the ending was the ending. And now he was back in the chair, and the kettle had been put on, and he was using words like stay. "You understand what staying means," she said. "In a county this size, people have already been talking. The commissioners' meeting." "I know about the commissioners' meeting," he said. She stopped. "How?" "Fowler heard it in town before we rode out this morning. Frances Hawley apparently has feelings about the outcome." Something crossed his face that was not quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. "She feels you handled yourself admirably. Her words, according to Fowler, were that you took everything Aldrich and that Harrington woman threw at you and sent it back cleaner than it came." Abigail blinked. Then she said, "Frances Hawley said that." "Fowler quotes directly," Nathaniel said. "It's one of his more useful qualities." She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "Caroline Harrington was in that meeting." "I assumed as much when I heard it was called," he said. He set down the cup. "Abigail, I need you to understand something. Caroline and I have known each other since we were children. Her father and my father were in business together. She has had, I was not careful enough. I did not correct something I should have corrected 2 years ago, and she built expectations on that. That is my fault. I am not—" He stopped, and she could see him choosing the words with the same care he used for everything that mattered. "I am not an easy man to be connected to. My name carries weight that I did not choose and cannot put down. Being in my life means being in the way of every person who wants something from that name." "I'm aware," she said. "I know you're aware," he said. "I'm saying it because I want you to have the full account, not the version that leaves out the difficult parts. You deserve the full account." She looked at him across the kitchen table in the afternoon light, with the tea getting cooler between them. And she thought about her father, who had always told the full account, and how rare that was, and how much it meant when you found it in a person. "All right," she said, "then here's mine." She folded her hands on the table. "I am a doctor's daughter with a limited practice and a county debt and a house that needs a new roof by October. I am known in this county as competent and capable, and someone who does not require assistance. I have made myself that way deliberately, because the alternative, being known as someone who needed things, was not acceptable to me after my father died." She held his gaze. "I am not easy either. I do not receive help gracefully. I have opinions about everything, and I express them, which not everyone finds comfortable. I am not going to become a different person because of circumstances, including favorable ones." He looked at her steadily. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to." "Most people do," she said, "eventually." "I'm not most people," he said. She picked up her cup. She drank. She set it down. "No," she said. "You're not." He didn't stay that night. He rode back to the inn in town, which was where he and Fowler had taken rooms, and Abigail watched the horse go down the good road in the late afternoon and stood at the door for a while after it was gone. She was not certain what had been decided. She was not certain anything had been decided. What she was certain of was that a door that she had thought was closed had been reopened, and that she had not closed it again, and that this meant something she was not quite ready to name. She went to bed at a reasonable hour and lay awake for a less reasonable one, and eventually decided that uncertainty was not the same as danger, and went to sleep. In the morning, everything changed. She was in the kitchen at first light, which was where she always was when she heard horses on the road. More than one. Moving fast. She went to the window. 3 riders coming from the south. One she didn't recognize. The second was Aldrich, the deputy commissioner, and he was not riding with the careful posture of a man making a routine call. The third was Edmund Harrington himself, Caroline's father, and the sight of Edmund Harrington on her road at sunrise moved something cold through her chest. She opened the door before they knocked. Aldrich pulled up and looked at her with the expression of a man who had been told what to do and was trying to remember all of it. "Miss Carter, we need to speak with you." "Evidently," she said. "About what?" "There's been a complaint filed," Aldrich said, "with the county court about unauthorized medical practice, and—" He paused, clearly not comfortable with the next part, "and about the interference in the Danner property case." She went very still. "The Danner case is resolved. The commissioner accepted." "The commissioner accepted Mr. Whitmore's bridge offer," Aldrich said. "The Danner matter is separate. Mr. Harrington's firm held one of the notes against the Danner property. The dismissal of the creditor's claim was legally sound," she said. "The secondary clause was registered and documented." Edmund Harrington had not spoken. He was a large man, gray-haired, with the particular confidence of someone who had been making decisions that affected other people for so long that it had become the texture of his personality. He looked at Abigail the way men like him often did, not dismissively exactly, but with the particular brand of assessment that calculated value in a specific and narrow set of categories. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice was measured, reasonable. "No one is questioning your conduct as such. But there are questions about the origin of the involvement in the Danner matter. Whether it was appropriate for someone in your position to be facilitating the intervention of an outside party in a county property dispute. I brought medical care to a man with a dislocated shoulder," she said. "He identified a legal situation that needed addressing and addressed it. Those are separate things." "Are they?" Harrington said. The 2 words sat in the air. "Mr. Harrington," she said, If you have a legal complaint about the Danner case, file it with the county court and address it to the lawyer who managed the proceeding. His name is James Pelham, and his office is in Richmond. If you have a complaint about my medical practice, you have already been through the commissioner's office and received an answer." She met his eyes. "If this is about something else, I'd appreciate you saying so plainly." A pause. "There will be a county assembly," Harrington said. "Friday evening. I think you should be there." He turned his horse. Aldrich followed. The third rider had not spoken once. She stood in her doorway until they were out of sight. Then she went inside and wrote a note to Nathaniel at the inn in town, short and direct, "Come when you can. Harrington was here. There is going to be an assembly Friday." She sent it with the morning mailboy and went to work. Nathaniel came at noon. He read the note she'd written in the hall of the inn according to Fowler, and had been saddled and out the door in 7 minutes. Fowler had relayed this with a neutrality that was itself a form of commentary. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and listened while she told him everything. He did not interrupt. He asked 2 questions, when she finished, both precise, both aimed at specific details, and then he was quiet for a moment, and she watched him think the way she had learned to watch him think, that visible interior process, the working through. "He held a note against the Danner land," Nathaniel said. "That's what Aldrich said." "How large?" "He didn't say." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "Harrington's been expanding his holding south for 3 years. The Danner farm sits between 2 parcels he already owns. If he could absorb it through the creditor's claim—" He stopped. He wasn't just a creditor. He was positioning. "For what?" "For a contiguous block of land along the southern creek line," Nathaniel said. "Large enough to be worth considerably more than its parts." He looked at her. The Danner widow sitting on the middle parcel was an obstacle. He needed the debt claim to work. Abigail sat back. "He lost that when you sent your lawyer." "He lost the easy version," Nathaniel said. "Now he's looking for another avenue." "Through me," she said. "Through you," he confirmed. "If he can raise sufficient doubt about your conduct, your practice, your involvement, he can potentially challenge the legitimacy of the evidence gathering that preceded Pelham's filing. It's a weak argument legally, but in a county court with a commissioner who has ties to his family, it doesn't need to be legally sound," she said. "It just needs to create enough confusion that the dismissal gets reviewed." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "And the assembly Friday." "Public opinion," he said. "Harrington's been in this county long enough to know that the commissioner follows the room. If he can get the room against you before the court review, he doesn't need to win legally," she said. "He just needs to make it easier for the commissioner to reverse course." "Yes," he said again. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm not afraid of an assembly." "I know you're not," he said. "I have records. I have documentation. I have done nothing wrong." "I know that too," he said. "But Abigail—" He paused. "At this assembly, Harrington will not come at you directly. He'll let Caroline do the talking. And Caroline—" Another pause. "Caroline is very skilled at making correct things sound irregular." She looked at him steadily. "You know her well." "Well enough," he said. "Has she done this before? Used her position to manage people who were in her way?" A pause that was its own answer. "She is a woman who believes very deeply in the correct order of things," he said, "and she acts accordingly when that order seems threatened." Abigail nodded slowly. "And you're the correct order she's protecting." "She believes so," he said. "Yes." "And what do you believe?" He looked at her. "I believe," he said, "that the correct order of things is considerably more flexible than Caroline Harrington thinks it is. And that a woman who saved my life in a creek bed and has been running a medical practice by herself for 3 years while managing a county debt has more right to be standing in any room in this county than most of the people who will be at that assembly." The kitchen was very quiet. "That's easy to say," she said. "In here." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm going to say it there too." She stared at him. "Nathaniel." "I'm going to the assembly," he said, "and I'm going to say exactly what happened, all of it. What I told you, what the road was, what you did, what the Danner case is, and why it was the right thing, plainly, in front of everyone." "That will make it worse," she said immediately. "If you stand up for me publicly, Harrington will use it. He'll say you're protecting your own interest. He'll say that I—" She stopped. "That you what?" he said. "That I used the situation," she said. "That the 6 days were not what they were." He looked at her with an expression she had not seen before on his face. Not the careful control, not the quiet attention. Something plainer than those things. Something that was almost anger, but was more specific than that. "Then let him say it," he said, "and let the county decide what they believe." "You're willing to stand in front of this county and have that said about you." "I'm willing to stand in front of this county and tell the truth," he said. "What people choose to believe after that is their own business." She looked at him for a long time. She was trying to find the version of this where he was wrong, where his plan made things worse, where she should tell him to stay home Friday and let her handle it alone, the way she handled everything. She was looking for that argument, and it kept dissolving before she could finish building it. "You're going to make an enemy of Edmund Harrington," she said. "Edmund Harrington held a note against a widow's land specifically to strip her of it," Nathaniel said. "He was already not my friend." She pressed her lips together. She looked at the table. "Fowler will need to be there. He was a witness to everything." "Already asked him," Nathaniel said. "He said yes before I finished the question." She looked up. "When did you ask him?" "On the way here," he said. "I had time to think on the ride." She stared at him. "You planned this before you walked in." "I had a direction in mind," he said. "I wanted to know if you'd agree to it." "And if I'd said no, then I'd have found another approach," he said. "But I'd have still gone Friday." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I'm not doing this for you," he said, and his voice was quiet and entirely serious. "I mean, I am, but that's not the only reason. What Harrington is doing to Martha Danner and what he's doing to you is the same operation with different leverage. He's using the county's tendency to accept the word of the powerful over the word of the practical. I've been watching that mechanism work my whole life, and I have had enough of watching it." She heard something in those last words that she hadn't heard from him before. Not the controlled version of feeling. The actual version. "Your mother," she said. He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. They sat with that for a moment. "All right," she said. "We go Friday. Together." He nodded once. "Together," he said. The county assembly was held in the large meeting room of the town hall, which had not been so full on a Friday evening in recent memory. Word had gone around in the particular efficient way that word went around in small Virginia counties that there was something worth attending. The benches were packed. People were standing along the walls. Abigail counted 3 different families she knew well, and perhaps a dozen she recognized by sight. And when she walked in with Nathaniel beside her, and Fowler 2 steps behind the room, did what rooms do when something unexpected enters them. It got quiet, and then louder, and then quiet again. Commissioner Beavis was at the front, looking profoundly unhappy. Aldrich was beside him. On the far right, seated in the front row, with her father's hand resting on his knee beside her, Caroline Harrington sat with the stillness of someone who had been preparing for this for days. Edmund Harrington stood when he saw Nathaniel. Nathaniel walked to the center of the room without looking at anyone in particular and stopped. "Mr. Whitmore," Harrington said, and his voice was smooth and confident and pitched to Carrie. "I wasn't aware you'd returned to the county." "I returned this week," Nathaniel said, "when I heard there were questions about the Danner case I wanted to address." "There are no questions about the Danner case per se," Harrington said. "There are questions about the process, about whether the involvement of outside interests." "My name is Nathaniel Whitmore," Nathaniel said, and his voice did not rise, but something happened to it that made the room go quiet. The way rooms go quiet when the person speaking has decided to stop managing their own authority and simply use it. I am the principal of Whitmore Land and Agricultural Development. I have been working in Virginia land law for 12 years. I am not an outside interest. I am a Virginian, and I am in this county because the bridge your road commission failed to repair for 4 months put my carriage in a creek bed. Harrington's expression didn't change. We appreciate your contribution to the bridge repair, he said. That's not in dispute. What is in dispute? What you are disputing, Nathaniel said, is the legal resolution of a case in which your firm held a creditor's note against a widow's property that you intended to use to acquire land adjacent to your existing southern holdings. The secondary clause in the Danner deed was registered, witnessed, and legally binding. My lawyer's filing was correct. The dismissal was correct. And the only thing your challenge accomplishes is making a grieving widow spend more months afraid of losing her home. The room was very still. Now, Nathaniel said. He turned slightly. I'd like to address the other matter that seems to have brought this assembly together. He looked at Caroline. Caroline looked back at him. Her composure was remarkable. But Abigail, watching from where she stood, saw something move through it, a flicker of something that might have been hurt before it became controlled. I stayed in Miss Carter's house for 6 days because the road was impassable following the bridge collapse, Nathaniel said. She provided medical care that was professional, appropriate, and demonstrably skilled. Her documentation of my treatment is complete and available to any court that wishes to review it. Any suggestion that those 6 days were anything other than what they were is false, and I will say so, under any legal oath, this county wishes to put before me. Caroline stood. The room shifted. Nathaniel, she said. Her voice was careful, quiet. The voice of a woman not performing for the room, but speaking directly to him, which was in its own way more devastating than performance. I never said anything improper occurred. I only expressed concern. Concern that a woman alone with a man of your standing for that length of time in those circumstances, Nathaniel said, the woman in question saved my life and set my shoulder without flinching, and made bean soup in a rainstorm, and went to see a widow the next morning because there was someone who needed help. Those circumstances. He held Caroline's gaze. I understand why you did what you did. I'm not angry with you, but I'm not going to stand in this room and allow the concern you expressed to stand without correction, because it isn't correct. Caroline sat down, very carefully, with the particular care of someone lowering themselves onto a surface they're not certain will hold. Harrington was quiet. He was looking at Nathaniel with the assessing calculation of a man recalculating a position. Commissioner Beavis cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, the question of Miss Carter's medical practice was reviewed at my specific request, Abigail said. The room turned to her. She had not planned to speak yet, but she was standing in the center of the room now, and Nathaniel was beside her, and the room was looking at her, and she found that the fear she had expected to feel was not there. What was there was the cold clarity she recognized as the version of herself that did the work. I requested the commissioner's review, she said, because when questions were raised, I wanted them answered properly, with full documentation, rather than answered by implication and rumor. Commissioner Beavis reviewed my records 3 days ago and found my practice in order. That review stands. She looked at Harrington. If you have a legal challenge to the Danner dismissal, file it with the court in Richmond, as Mr. Whitmore's lawyer has already invited you to do. If the secondary clause is invalid, a court will say so. But you will need a legal argument, not an assembly. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Martha Danner spoke from the back bench. Martha Danner, who had come in quietly, who had been sitting in the last row, who had not said anything until now, stood up and said, I'd like to say something. Every head in the room turned. Martha stood with her straight back, and her iron hair and her hands still at her sides, and she looked at the front of the room, and she said, My husband worked that land for 30 years. He bought it legal and registered it legal, and when he died, he left it to me the only way he knew how, which was by having had the right paperwork done right the first time. I didn't know that paperwork protected me. I spent 4 months thinking I was going to lose my home." She paused. "Abigail Carter and this man," she nodded toward Nathaniel, "found what protected me and made sure it worked. That is what happened. Whatever else is being discussed in this room tonight, that is what happened." She sat down. The room did not erupt. It did something quieter and more definitive than erupting. It settled, like a structure that had been under uneven pressure and had just found its balance. Edmund Harrington looked at his daughter. Caroline was looking at her hands. Commissioner Beavis looked at the ceiling. Aldrich looked at his hat. Nathaniel looked at Abigail. She looked back at him. They walked out of the town hall into the night air, and neither of them spoke for a moment, because there are events that need a moment of silence before they can be discussed, and this was one of them. Fowler went to see to the horses. Martha Danner passed them on her way to the road, patted Abigail's arm once in passing without stopping, and walked on. Frances Hawley appeared briefly and said, "Well done," and disappeared before Abigail could respond. Nathaniel stood beside her in the cooling night and looked at the road. "That went better than I expected," he said. "Harrington isn't finished," she said. "No," he agreed. "But he's recalculating. That takes time, and my lawyer is faster than his." She looked at the side of his face. "Caroline." "I'll speak to her tomorrow," he said. "Properly. What I should have said 2 years ago." He paused. "I owe her that conversation, even if I don't owe her the outcome she wants." Abigail nodded. "She wasn't entirely wrong, you know," she said, "about the complications." "I know," he said. "They don't go away because tonight went well." "I know that too," he said. "Your mother is still in Boston." "My mother," he said, "is a practical woman who loves me and wants me settled, and I am going to show her that I am settled." He turned to look at her. "Here, if you'll have me." She looked at him for a long time. "You're asking me something," she said. "Not yet," he said. "Not tonight. Tonight I'm telling you what I want. The question comes when you're ready to hear it." She looked at the road. The night was warm and still, and the stars above the Virginia hills were bright enough to navigate by, and she had been navigating by her own lights for 3 years on this road, and she was good at it. She was also, she admitted to herself in the quiet of the night air, very tired of navigating alone. "Tell Fowler to bring your horse tomorrow," she said. "There's still a roof section on the north side that needs looking at before October." She felt more than saw the change in him beside her, that settling, that adjustment. "I'll tell him," he said. She started walking toward home. After a moment he fell into step beside her, and they walked the beginning of the good road together in the dark. And neither of them said anything else, because nothing else needed saying yet. The roof on the north side needed more than looking at. Nathaniel figured that out within 10 minutes of being up there the following morning, moving carefully on account of his shoulder, running his hand along the rotted section of framing, with the focused expression of a man who had been underestimating a problem and was now correcting that assessment. "It's worse than you said," he called down. "I said it needed looking at before October," Abigail called back. She was in the kitchen garden below, not looking up, pulling the last of the summer squash. "I didn't say it was fine. There's a 6-foot section here that won't make it to September." "I know." A pause. "You knew, and you didn't." "I was managing it," she said. He came down the ladder with the careful economy of a man who had learned over the past weeks exactly how much his shoulder would tolerate before it started making its opinion known. He stood in the yard and looked at her, and she could feel him looking, and she kept pulling squash. "Abigail," he said. "There's timber at the Mercer farm they said I could have," she said. "I was going to hire Miller's boy in October. I had a plan." "I can do it," he said. She stood up and looked at him. "You have a bad shoulder." "Fowler has 2 good ones," he said. "Between us we can manage." She looked at him for a moment, with the particular expression she used when she was deciding whether to argue about something or let it go. She had observed, very good at making certain arguments too reasonable to push back on. It was occasionally infuriating. This morning, it was something else. "All right," she said, "but you're not climbing back up there until I check the shoulder." "I wasn't planning to climb back up today," he said. "Good. I was planning to get the timber this afternoon." She looked at the sky. She looked at him. "Of course you were," she said, and went back to the squash. Fowler got the timber. Nathaniel spent the afternoon measuring and marking and doing everything that didn't require lifting with a thoroughness that Abigail watched through the kitchen window while she worked, and thought not for the first time that he approached practical problems exactly the way he approached legal ones. Completely. With attention to the parts that would cause trouble later if ignored. It had been 4 days since the assembly. In those 4 days, several things had happened. Harrington's legal challenge to the Danner dismissal had been filed in Richmond and assigned to a judge who, according to Nathaniel's lawyer, had presided over 3 similar cases involving secondary clause protections and had ruled in favor of the clause in all 3. Pelham had written to say he was not concerned, which was the version of optimism that lawyers permitted themselves. Caroline Harrington had received Nathaniel at her father's house on Saturday morning. He had been there for 2 hours. He had not told Abigail everything that was said in that conversation, and she had not asked because some conversations were not hers to know. What he had told her was that Caroline had been angry, and then quiet, and then had said at the end that she hoped he understood what he was giving up. He had told her he understood very well what he was choosing. They had parted, he said, without warmth, but without the particular kind of damage that makes things impossible later. "She'll be all right," he had said. "You sound very certain of that," Abigail had said. "She's a strong woman," he had said. "She wanted the wrong thing, but she's strong enough to want something else." Abigail had thought about that for a while. She had decided he was probably right, and that Caroline Harrington's resilience was not her concern, and that thinking about it further was not useful. What was useful was the letter that had arrived from Boston on the 3rd day. It was from Helena Whitmore. It was short, 4 sentences. It said, "I have spoken with my son at length. I still have concerns which I have expressed to him directly, and which he has heard and considered and made his own decision about. I would like to meet you before I form a final opinion. If you are willing, I will come to Virginia in September." Abigail had read it twice. Then she had read it to Nathaniel, who was at the kitchen table with coffee and one of her notebooks, and his expression had moved through several things quickly before settling into something she thought might be relief. "She's coming," he said. "That's what the letter says." "She doesn't come to people," he said. "She invites people to her. That she's offering to come—" He stopped. "That's significant." "Is it good significant or complicated significant?" Abigail said. "Both," he said honestly. Abigail had written back the same afternoon. She had said, "I am willing. September is manageable. I will not pretend to be something I am not, and I expect you will not want me to." She had sent it before she could reconsider the last sentence. Nathaniel, when she told him what she'd written, had looked at her with an expression that was entirely the unguarded one. "Perfect," he said. "You haven't heard her response yet," she said. "It doesn't matter," he said. "It was perfect." On the 5th morning, something happened that none of them had anticipated. Abigail was at the Albright farm when it started. The youngest Albright, whose cough she had been monitoring, had developed a fever overnight, and she had come out early to assess, and had been there 2 hours when Fowler appeared in the farmyard on horseback, moving with the urgent efficiency of a man who had determined that urgency was required. She met him at the fence. "There's a man at the house," Fowler said. "Arrived an hour ago. He says he's from the county court. He has papers." She looked at him. "What kind of papers?" "He wouldn't say to me," Fowler said. "He said they were for you, and they required your signature." She finished with the Albright boy. The fever was manageable. She left instructions. She was back on her horse in 4 minutes and rode home with Fowler at a pace that left no room for conversation. The man from the county court was sitting on the bench outside her door. He was young, nervous, and holding a leather document sleeve with both hands. He stood when she rode up. "Miss Carter," he said. "What is this?" she said. She didn't dismount yet. "It's a summons," he said, "for a court review. The Harrington firm has filed a secondary claim not against the Danner property directly, but against the process by which the evidence was gathered. They're claiming that your involvement in directing Mr. Whitmore's attention to the case constitutes interference in a county financial matter by an unlicensed agent." She stared at him. "An unlicensed agent? That's the language in the filing," he said with the expression of a man who understood that he was the wrong person to be angry at, and was hoping she understood that too. "I'm only the delivery." She took the document sleeve. She dismounted. She went inside. Nathaniel arrived 20 minutes later. She heard his horse before she heard the door, and she was already at the table with the filing open in front of her when he came in. He read it standing up. His face was very controlled. When he finished, he set it down on the table. "This is Harrington's second play," he said. "The first challenge failed because the legal ground was solid. This one doesn't need to succeed legally. It just needs to put you in front of a court. Make you spend time and effort defending yourself. Make it costly enough that next time someone like Martha Danner needs help, you think twice." She looked at the filing. "Can he do this?" "He can file it," Nathaniel said. "Whether it survives a preliminary review is another matter." He paused. "Pelham needs to see this today." "Then send it," she said. He looked at her. "Abigail, this is going to get louder before it gets quieter." "I know," she said. "He's doing this because we went to that assembly. Because I stood up and said what happened. This is retaliation." "I know that too," she said. "If you want me to step back from this. If my involvement is making it worse for you." She looked at him. "Don't," she said. "Don't offer to disappear to make things easier. That's not what I want." He held her gaze. "What do you want?" "I want to fight it," she said. "I want Pelham to tear it apart, and I want it on record that Edmund Harrington filed a retaliatory claim against a medical practitioner because she helped a widow keep her land. I want that on record in the county court where anyone can read it." She held his gaze. "And then I want to get back to work. Because Mrs. Albright's son has a fever, and I have 3 other families I'm supposed to see this week, and Edmund Harrington does not get to be the most important thing in my life." Something happened in Nathaniel's face. Not the slow movement she was used to. Something faster. Something that came and went before he fully controlled it. "All right," he said. His voice was slightly different. "I'll send word to Pelham." "Good," she said. She stood up. "There's coffee on the stove." She picked up her medical bag and went back out the door to finish her rounds. Pelham's response came in 48 hours. It was, by the standards of legal correspondence, almost cheerful. He had reviewed the filing and had identified 3 procedural deficiencies. 2 precedents directly contrary to Harrington's argument, and 1 case from 1811 in which a nearly identical secondary claim had been dismissed with a written reprimand to the filing party. He intended to request a preliminary review and expected the filing to be dismissed within 3 weeks. He also intended, he wrote, to include a motion for costs given the evident retaliatory nature of the claim. Nathaniel read it aloud at the kitchen table. Abigail listened with her hands folded and her expression level. When he finished, she said, "He sounds confident." "Pelham is almost never wrong when he sounds confident," Nathaniel said. "Almost," she said. "Almost," he agreed. A pause. Then she said, "What does this cost?" He looked at her. "Nothing." "Nathaniel, nothing," he said again, steady. "Pelham works for me. This case began because of something that happened while I was a guest in your house. I'm not going to be a charity case," she said. "You're not," he said. "You're going to be the reason a widow kept her land, and the reason a retaliatory legal practice gets documented in county court records. That's not charity, that's consequence." He held her gaze. "Let me handle this part. You handle the Albright boy." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her hands. Then she said very quietly, "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "At letting someone else carry something," she said. "I know," he said. "You're getting better at it." She looked up at him. "Am I?" "You told me about the roof," he said. She almost smiled. Almost. "Eventually," she said. "It's a start," he said. 3 weeks later, Pelham's prediction proved exactly right. The preliminary review dismissed Harrington's filing in 20 minutes. The judge's written order included a phrase that Pelham underlined in his letter to Nathaniel. Filing appears to constitute harassment of a county medical practitioner in retaliation for lawful assistance in a property matter. The motion for costs was granted. Harrington did not file again. He did not speak publicly about Abigail Carter or Nathaniel Whitmore again. He redirected his attention to his southern holdings and the expanding tobacco market, and the various other operations that occupied a man of his resources, and the county, which had watched everything with the attentive interest of a place that doesn't have a great deal of outside entertainment, gradually concluded that the situation had resolved and moved on to other concerns. The bridge at Miller's Creek was repaired in September. Nathaniel oversaw 2 days of it personally, which the county work crew found slightly unusual, but not unwelcome since he knew what he was looking at and asked the right questions, and didn't pretend to know things he didn't know, which was more than could be said for most men who came out to oversee things. Abigail rode past the finished bridge on a Tuesday morning and stopped her gray mare in the middle of it and looked down at the solid new planking and the reinforced supports and felt something settle in her chest that was not dramatic but was real. Her father had crossed this bridge. She had crossed it her whole life. It had nearly killed the man who was the man she was not yet using words for privately or otherwise, because some things needed to arrive in their own time, and she respected that in medicine, and apparently also in this. She clicked the mare on and went to see Mrs. Hensley. Helena Whitmore arrived on a Thursday in early September. She came in a good carriage with a single maid and no advance drama, which Abigail took as a positive sign. She was 61, gray-haired, with Nathaniel's eyes, and a bearing that had clearly been the model for his that quality of occupying space fully, and without apology, without aggression, simply as a matter of fact. She stood in Abigail's kitchen and looked around it with the attentive, unhurried gaze of a woman taking inventory of something she needs to understand. Then she looked at Abigail. "You wrote that you wouldn't pretend to be something you're not," she said. "I did," Abigail said. "Good," Helena said. "Neither will I." She sat down without being invited, which told Abigail a great deal. "I wrote you a letter that was unkind. It was accurate in its facts and unkind in its intent, and I am aware of the difference." Abigail sat across from her. "Why did you write it?" "Because my son came home from Virginia looking different than he's looked in years," Helena said, "and I was afraid of what that meant. I am not accustomed to being afraid, and it made me behave badly." She held Abigail's gaze. "I owe you an apology for the letter." "You owe me clarity," Abigail said. "The apology can follow from that." Helena looked at her for a moment. Then something moved in her face, not a smile exactly, but the precursor to one. "Nathaniel said you were direct," she said. "Was that what he said?" "He said you were the most honestly direct person he had encountered in 15 years of business dealings," Helena said. "I thought he was exaggerating. He wasn't." Abigail looked at her steadily. "What did you come here to determine?" Helena folded her hands on the table. "Whether you are a woman who wants my son, or a woman who wants what comes with him." "Those are not the only two options," Abigail said. Helena paused. No, Abigail said. "There's a third. A woman who isn't certain she wants the complication of either one, but who keeps finding that the man himself is—" She stopped and searched for the right word and found it worth the trouble. A silence. Helena looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "My husband was a difficult man. Brilliant, driven, not easy to live alongside. I chose him anyway. Not because of what he had, because of what he was, which was the most genuinely purposeful person I had ever met. She paused. Nathaniel is the same. He is not easy. He is worth it. I know, Abigail said. I set his shoulder in a creek bed. I've had some time to observe. Helena laughed. It was unexpected enough that Abigail blinked. It was a real laugh, full and genuine, and it changed her face entirely, and Abigail understood in that moment where Nathaniel had gotten the thing she liked best about him, which was the quality of being completely present when something actually reached him. All right, Helena said when the laugh settled. Tell me about your father's practice. Nathaniel says you've developed preparations that go beyond what's in the standard texts. Abigail looked at her. That's what you want to talk about. I want to understand you, Helena said. Start with what you're proudest of. Abigail thought for a moment. Then she got up, went to the shelf, and came back with her notebook. They talked for 2 hours. Nathaniel came in from the barn, where he had taken himself with great deliberateness to give them the kitchen at the end of the 2 hours, and found them still at the table with the notebook open between them and Abigail explaining the dosing observations on willow bark, while his mother made notes on a separate sheet of paper. He stood in the doorway. They both looked up at him. His mother looked at him with the expression of a woman who has made a decision. She's right about the apothecary in town, Helena said. He's compounding it wrong. He's been told, Nathaniel said. He should be told more forcefully, Helena said. She looked at Abigail. There's a physician in Boston I know well, Dr. Marcus Webb. He's been trying to establish a standard of practice for herbal compounds for 5 years. Your observations would be of considerable interest to him. Abigail stared at her. I'm not a licensed physician. Neither was half the faculty he's working with, Helena said briskly. What matters is whether the work is sound. Is it sound? Yes, Abigail said. Then I'll write to Marcus. She stood smoothing her skirts with the decisive efficiency of a woman who had done what she came to do and was ready to move to the next thing. I'll stay at the inn tonight. Nathaniel, I'd like to speak with you this evening. She looked at Abigail. Thank you for the tea and the conversation and the honesty, the last one especially. Thank you for coming, Abigail said. I should have come instead of writing that letter, Helena said. We would have saved several weeks of unnecessary difficulty. She gathered her things. I'll see myself out. She left. Nathaniel stood in the kitchen and looked at Abigail. 2 hours, he said. She takes some getting used to, Abigail said. But she's a good woman. Yes, he said. She is. He came to the table and sat down and looked at the open notebook and his mother's notes beside it. She's never made notes in a conversation before, he said. In my memory. She absorbs and analyzes and responds. She doesn't write things down. Abigail looked at the notes. She wanted to remember it accurately, she said. She wanted to remember you accurately, he said. She looked at him. He was looking at her with the unguarded expression, the one she had stopped trying to protect herself from sometime around the 3rd week of his second visit, when she had finally admitted to herself that protecting herself from it was not something she was actually going to manage. She approves, he said. She's reserving judgment, Abigail said. She wrote notes, he said. She approves. Abigail looked at the notebook. She thought about Helena Whitmore's laugh, which had been entirely real, and the questions she'd asked, which had been sharp and genuine, and the way she'd said your observations would be of considerable interest as a statement of fact rather than a consolation. Maybe, Abigail said. Definitely, he said. She looked at him. She said she wants to talk to you tonight. I know what she wants to talk about, he said. She waited. She's going to tell me that she understands now, he said, and that she supports the decision. And then she's going to give me a great deal of advice that I didn't ask for, which is her right as my mother, and I'm going to listen to most of it, which is mine as her son. He paused. And then she's going to go back to Boston and write to Dr. Marcus Webb. Abigail was quiet for a moment. And what happens after that? He looked at her. He reached across the table and put his right hand over hers, not grasping, not demanding, just there the way he did everything that mattered with complete and unambiguous intention. That, he said, depends on what you say to a question I've been working up to asking you for approximately 4 weeks. Her heart did something it had been doing intermittently for those same 4 weeks, and that she had been cataloging with the careful attention of a woman who believes in accurate records. Then ask it, she said. He looked at her steadily. Marry me, he said. Not the name, not the land, not the position. Me. The man who reads your father's medical texts and fixes kitchen floors and has a mother who takes notes when she's impressed by someone. Marry that man. And I will spend the rest of my life making certain you never have to carry anything alone that you don't want to carry alone. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the September morning was moving toward noon, and the light was the particular quality of early fall in Virginia, and somewhere down the road, the gray mare was in the paddock, and Mrs. Hensley's knees needed checking, and the Albright boy was almost over his fever, and Martha Danner was on her land. Abigail looked at the man across the table. She looked at his hand over hers. She thought about the creek bed, and the 6 days, and the commissioners' meeting, and the assembly, and the roof that needed fixing, and his mother's laugh, and the specific quality of silence in this kitchen when it was occupied by the right person. She turned her hand over under his and held it. Yes, she said. That man I'll marry. He let out a breath. A real one, not controlled, not managed. Just breath released like something that had been held for longer than was comfortable. Good, he said. Don't say I didn't warn you, she said. I told you I was difficult. You told me you were direct, he said. I find them indistinguishable. That, she said, is either very wise or very foolish. Ask me again in 20 years, he said. She looked at him with everything she had decided to stop protecting him from seeing, and let him see it, because accurate records mattered, and he deserved the full account. 20 years, she said. All right. They were married in October, 6 days before the first frost in the same county where her father had practiced medicine for 22 years, and where she had been running his practice for 3, which meant that roughly half the people in attendance had at some point been treated by either Thomas Carter or his daughter, and the other half knew someone who had. Martha Danner came and sat in the second row, and did not cry, because she was not a woman who cried, but she held Abigail's hand for a long moment afterward and said, "Your father would have been very proud." And Abigail received that, and held it, and carried it with her for the rest of the day. Frances Holly came and was visibly delighted, and spent most of the reception talking to Helena Whitmore, who tolerated this with the gracious efficiency of a woman who had attended a great many events and knew how to manage them, and who Abigail observed seemed to genuinely enjoy Frances's particular variety of comprehensive county knowledge. Fowler stood near the back during the ceremony, with his hat in his hands, and the expression of a man who had been present at something significant and was aware of it. Caroline Harrington did not come. Abigail had not expected her to, and did not fault her for it, and thought briefly in the way you think about people who have moved out of the active landscape of your life, but not entirely out of your mind, that Caroline would find her way eventually to something that suited her better than Nathaniel Whitmore had. She thought Helena had been right about that. She set it down and turned back to the people in the room. Edmund Harrington sent no word, because there was nothing he could say that served his interests, and he was above all else a man who served his interests. 6 months after the wedding, Abigail opened a medical room, not in her house, a separate building purpose-built on the land adjacent to the house that Nathaniel had purchased the previous winter with such quiet efficiency that she had only realized what he was doing when the framing went up. She had confronted him about it in the kitchen, and he had said with the precision she was now entirely accustomed to, that he had reviewed the need, assessed the location, and determined it was the correct next step, and had she wanted to discuss it before he proceeded, he should have asked, and he was sorry for that. But was she willing to discuss it now because he had 3 questions about the layout? She had stood in the kitchen for a moment looking at him. Then she had sat down and told him about the layout. The room served families who could not afford the apothecary's prices, and who had no other place to go. She kept it open 3 days a week, and on emergencies without schedule, which Nathaniel managed without complaint, except on one occasion when she came home at 2 in the morning to find him at the kitchen table with coffee, and the expression of a man who had been waiting and had decided he was entitled to express one feeling about it, which was that he would have come with her if she had sent word. She had looked at him. Then she had sat down and drunk the coffee he pushed toward her and told him about the Mercer baby who had arrived early and small and with more fight in her than Abigail had seen in a child that size in a long while. "She's going to be all right," she said. "Good," he said. "I didn't send word because I didn't know it would run long," she said. "I know," he said. "Next time I'll send Fowler." "Thank you," he said. That was the entire argument. She filed it in the category of things that had been said and addressed and did not need to be returned to, which was where most of their arguments ended up, because they were both of them people who preferred resolution to prolongation. Nathaniel used the winter to build the first of what became several things he described in correspondence as community improvements, and which Abigail described to his face as him finding practical outlets for the part of himself that had spent 30 years watching resources distributed badly and being frustrated about it. He endowed a small landing library in the town, which the commissioner accepted with the careful gratitude of a man who has stopped questioning the motivations behind gifts that benefit his county. He established a fund for road maintenance that operated independently of county politics, which was the part that had frustrated him the most, and that he had therefore addressed with the most thorough structural design. He negotiated over 2 lengthy seasons, and with the assistance of 2 lawyers and a great deal of patience, a fair wages standard for the workers on his Virginia holdings that became within 3 years a point of reference for neighboring landowners who were less principled but more competitive than they were principled. He came home from a Richmond meeting one evening in the second spring and found Abigail at the table writing in her notebook, which was the version of her he liked best, entirely absorbed entirely herself, and he sat down across from her and said, "Pelham says the wages standard is spreading south." She looked up. "How far south?" "3 counties so far," he said. "He expects 5 by fall." She looked at him steadily. "You planned for this to spread." "I designed it to be replicable," he said. Whether it spread depended on whether neighboring landowners decided their workers' productivity was worth the investment. He paused. "Apparently it is." She went back to her notebook. Then she said, "Dr. Webb wrote." He looked up. "The Boston physician. He's published a paper that includes 3 of my observations on compound dosing," she said, "with attribution." She kept writing. "It's the first time I've seen my name in a medical publication." The kitchen was quiet. "Abigail," he said. She looked up. His face was doing the unguarded thing. The complete one. The one that she had stopped trying to document and had simply started receiving, because some things weren't meant to be recorded, they were meant to be lived in. "Your father would have put that on the wall," he said. She looked at the letter. She thought about Thomas Carter, who had spent 22 years on the good road doing the work because it was the work without recognition, without publication, without anyone writing down that what he knew was worth knowing. "He would have been insufferable about it," she said. "Yes," Nathaniel said, "insufferable and right." She folded the letter and put it in the notebook and closed it. She looked at him across the table. This man she had pulled from a creek bed 2 years ago. This man who had read her father's texts and fixed her kitchen floor and stood up in a county assembly and asked her a question in her own kitchen and meant every word of it. This man who was difficult and purposeful and entirely worth the trouble. And she felt the thing she had been feeling for 2 years now, without finding better words for it, which was the particular fullness of a life that had been built by hand and was against considerable odds exactly right. "Come to bed," she said. "You have a meeting in Richmond tomorrow and you need sleep." "I know," he said. "And the Mercer baby is coming for a checkup in the morning, and I need you out of the kitchen by 8. "I know that too," he said. He stood. He picked up her notebook and held it out to her. She took it. She stood. He put his hand at the small of her back, the way he did at the end of the day. the quiet, familiar way of a man who had been doing this long enough that it was simply the texture of how evenings ended, and they walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs of the house that had been her father's house and was now theirs on the good road in Virginia, in the second year of a life that neither of them had planned and both of them had chosen. Outside, the spring night was warm. The road was quiet. The bridge at Miller's Creek held steady over water that was running clear and calm. And the woman who had once been known only as the late doctor's daughter was known now as something more complete, not because a man had given her a name, but because she had spent 2 years building something real in plain sight of a county that had learned slowly and with some difficulty to see it clearly. She had come from this road. She had stayed on this road, and she had made this road mean something that would last long after the summer. That changed everything was only a story. People told about the woman who ran into the storm and pulled a stranger from a wreck and did not know and would not have cared that he was the richest man in the county. She had only known he needed help. That was always from the beginning exactly enough.